public presentation. It's information only, and it's regarding regards to the farmers market design. Charette, I believe that's how you say it. And it's going to be by the American Institute of Architects, Kansas City Pillars.
Good evening, everyone. I'll just give a quick introduction. I think, as you are all aware, we had the pleasure of being visited twice by the AIA Kansas City Pillars group, who spent some time considering our farmers market site. They used that site as an example or guinea pig for their exercise of a design charrette for just possible amenity improvements for the site itself. And I have Kyle Rogler here from that group, also from the Rural and Park Planning Commission. As a side note, you may know him from that world as well, here to present some of their findings. And let me turn off lights. Is that okay? Is that too much? Okay. Maybe.
This is a test.
You can shoot at the laptop.
Oh, I got you.
It's on. That's why you test?
Yeah.
Pretty good. You know what? I will advance your slide.
That's okay.
Okay.
All right. Good evening. Like Emily said, my name is Kyle Rogler. I'm part of the AIA Kansas City Pillars Leadership Program. Just a brief introduction about what this group is. This program was developed by the AIA Kansas City in order to prepare a representative cross-section of the chapter's emerging leaders for their role in shaping the future of both the architectural profession and the greater Kansas City metropolitan area. This training program includes active participation in programs and exposure to community leaders and issues. This Pillars group this year included 16 architects, engineers, and contractors from a cross-section of the metropolitan firm, both big and small. In October, we learned about the grassroots development efforts in Kansas City. So we visited various places such as the East Bottoms in Kansas City, Missouri, about what they were doing with local pig and development down there. And another one of our sessions was here in Mission, Kansas. That tour was led by Kevin Fullerton of Springboard Creative, who was kind enough to have a tour, and we were able to visit many of the local shops and many of the recent grassroots developments that were happening in Mission, Kansas. And so as part of this year's new initiative, Learn, See, Do, the Pillars have been working actively with local community groups and other organizations to help bring our expertise as architects, engineers, and contractors to their communities. Some of our past projects include working with the Interurban Art House in Overland Park, Kansas, about some space planning designs for their new space in the old post office. Having a STEAM learning session with the Kansas City Neighborhood Academy, a new charter school that opened up in KCMO around the Wendleton neighborhood. And we also provided site planning visions for the Nile Valley Aquaponics Farm, a recent aquaponics farm opened east of Truce to provide local food for that community and to provide probably one of the first aquaponic farms in Kansas City. Harking back to that October meeting that we had as part of our group, when our committee started to plan our event, we immediately thought back to Mission, Kansas, and being in a community that we were so graciously welcomed in, what were things that we could do? And one of the things that we popped up with was having a visioning Charette session for the Mission Farm and Flower Market. So if we go to the next slide on. Oh, okay. So on May 11th of 2017, after touring the Cultivate KC training gardens up in Kansas City, Kansas, to learn more about local urban agriculture in Kansas City, the Pillars group met at the market site to learn more about the market operations, needs identified, and hear from some citizens about from the city of Mission. We met with, actually I probably should have posted this one first. This is just a compilation of some of the various sites. So we have, when we visited the Juniper Training Gardens and our tour back in October. So for the Charette, we met on site. Emily Randall was there to kind of help explain the history of the market. You know, what were certain operational needs that they had? What were things that they were looking for. And we then met at Sylvester Powell Community Center, where we divided into 4 different groups to develop 4 different visions. After we had worked about an hour and a half on those various visions, we presented to a few citizens of Mission, Kansas to get their feedback and to kind of hear their responses to how these things could potentially influence and help the market grow even further. What I'm going to show tonight are kind of visioning documents. There's no like hard cost estimate tied to any of these visions, but throughout the charrette, and something I've talked to many of my peers afterwards, the common thread of, we want to have the greatest impact for the lowest dollar cost, and for this to be an incremental design, we're pretty much spread throughout each of these concepts that you will be seeing tonight. So we'll start with concept A. Concept A started with having the bandstand area at the southeast corner of the site by the Rock Creek Trail and Rock Creek, and to have that bandstand act as kind of a radial centerpiece. So from the bandstand, you would then radiate out with kind of built-in limestone benches or other seating options that would provide kind of a backdrop to the live music that you currently provide at the market. We would keep the Rock Creek Trail currently in its current configuration with this scheme, and what we would focus on in this scheme is to provide a butterfly shade structure that would go over the current sidewalk. So this is kind of just a quick sketch of showing what that would be like. What this would allow you to do is, one, it provides kind of a permanent shade structure for pedestrians who are walking along the sidewalk to work with vendors. It also provides the potential to collect rainwater to be used for the site for additional vegetation. It also has the opportunity to be a power source that vendors can hook up to. And then, depending on how you design or how you want to go about it, you could even install solar panels on this, so you have solar-powered electrical outlets. And with this butterfly structure, it would extend both towards the sidewalk and towards the south, also to again kind of provide, if someone wanted to kind of, if someone was busy on the sidewalk, another idea proposed by another group that you could apply here is you have pervious pavers that go southward into the park. So that would provide someone that, if there's a mother and their child buying vegetables from someone, they can, walk around that structure and still be shaded. Another feature of this concept is the idea of using berms, so mounds of landscape to kind of create spaces that people can gather in, people can sit on, they can have picnics on, and that this berm concept can extend to the west all the way to this building, and that you can have an active landscape where you have multiple picnic tables, you have places that kids can play, and that would kind of provide this linkage between the two sections between Reed. In the next slide, I'll show kind of a rendering. In this concept, also, we propose that you have some kind of gateway element from the additional parking lot and from the parking lot closer to Knoll as kind of ways to demarcate, this is the Mission Market area. And so this is just kind of showing what that could look like. It could be a metal structure, it could be a number of things. But it's some way that you could demarcate, you're now entering into the Mission Market. It provides kind of a sense of entry that, when you're walking down the sidewalk, that, okay, I've now entered the market, I've now entered this unique space that the City of Mission has set aside. For Concept B has a lot of the similar concepts, but they've done a few things differently in this one. The biggest one here, and part of this is that the sketch, we use just trace paper. That trace paper is probably pushed up an additional 20 feet forward, so this all really needs to move down. We're not proposing taking out 2 lanes of Johnson Drive. We know that would cause Armageddon. We heard that loud and clear at the charrette, so keeping that in mind. The big one here would be a realignment of a Rock Creek Trail to straighten out that path. But by straightening out that path, then you have your the amenities along the southern edge of benches, picnic tables, and a bandstand. And with this concept, this was the one that originally proposed the pervious landscape pavers that would go south of that sidewalk, so it provides just an additional walking space for pedestrians, and it kind of provides a lane that if you're not actively buying produce from someone, you have somewhere else that you feel comfortable walking. And the key element that kind of differentiates this concept from the others is how they decided to do kind of a shade structure. So what they proposed was a steel metal post, kind of tied into the ground, and between those metal posts that you would string either lights or filter fabric that would provide kind of more of a temporary shade element. This being a very cost-effective way to provide shade very quickly with kind of low-cost materials. And from the existing shed, when you tie these posts together, that then also allows you to distribute power throughout the site. And this is kind of a perspective showing, looking westward, what that would kind of feel like. So we have our different zones with this. So that would be the other element with the shade structure, is that you have your repose area, which is the realigned Rock Creek Trail. You have your community zone, again, where people are, they have their dogs or their kids are playing. And then you have your market zone. So it kind of, that shade element kind of helps define those different areas. This is a view of that same idea looking east towards Knoll and the Capitol Federal. And then this is showing possible expansion to the east. And so what this group looked at was, again, providing additional benches to the south of Rock Creek Trail, but also using this part of the building to the east as an expansion bandstand. Part of the reason what we learned is there were originally buildings here, but the reason why they were took out was because they were in the floodplain of Rock Creek. So again, it's kind of, you can't have something permanent there, but let's utilize that space to its best potential. And also with this concept, they were looking at how they can activate Reed Street as kind of an open plaza. So pulling the this food cart, the food trucks, kind of to both sides, and having this as kind of an open plaza that people can go to various food trucks with. And with this concept, you can expand that metal tube and trellis structure throughout the whole site if you desire. And then this was just showing, again, just additional pop-up ideas of maybe you have kind of a banister to demarcate this is where the market is. For concept C, this one took the unique approach of looking at Reed Street, Reed's Road, as the focal point of the market. The idea that this group had developed is you have Reed Road, which is already closed off to house some of the food trucks, will become the center of the market. And the way you would actually structure the vendors is you go from the center of Reed's Road and go outward. That way, that will make the market feel bigger. It's not all lumped onto one side. You're starting to utilize both sides of what you have that you can use for the market. And then again, this group also proposed on this eastern side of the building, this would also be a location where you could have a bandstand. And as you develop, what this group started to propose too is that maybe one side, maybe this starts to get reserved for food trucks, maybe that gets reserved for vendor parking, but you would start to develop where you close off Reed's Road as kind of your central plaza area. That's the other one. So here you can have either kind of a large tent structure or a large steel structure with some fabric hanging across, where you would have, a seating area that if people had food they wanted to eat, they could sit down. And likewise, you can have an additional playground area to the west of that. And in this concept as well, they kind of proposed having the restrooms in that bandstand area to the east as well. And then beyond that, they had a welcome sign that would kind of demarcate right over Reed Street. So, again, if the market wasn't open, similar with downtown Overland Park, there's a place that okay, well, yeah, the market's not today, but when I drive by here, now I know where it is. And again, this group also proposed kind of the steel tube and fabric structure as an overlay to this concept, if you wanted to do that. Finally, we have concept D. Concept D, again, looked at using Reed's Road as kind of the central starting point of the market. And in this one, they proposed they got the most detail into the phasing. So their first phase would be to build Reed's Road as a plaza. You would then build restrooms and storage. You would actually build them just west of Reed's Road, right here, right below Rock Creek Trail. Again, kind of a central location that you can utilize throughout the year. You would then develop the bandstand cover. We then have roll-up shade structures. Again, kind of just covering that sidewalk again to kind of protect pedestrians and vendors. You build a playground, you then build your sign, you could have additional route shaded, and then you start to develop an informal lawn. And so a fully built out scheme would start to look something like this. This is a lot of ink work, but you would have, your formal lawn to the west of the site. You'd have your central plaza area, and then again to the east, you would then also have that informal green where people are already using it to, have their dogs walk or have their kids play. So you have a tight central location. And the one concept that this group looked at was really focusing on that plaza area. So they developed this scheme of where you could put 4 vendor or food trucks just directly east of Reed, and you could again have that canopy, and if later on you wanted to build a second canopy, you could build it over there, over here. You could have additional vendors through this walkway created here, and again start to build those vendors out from Reed's Road, and even have food trucks be kind of your vehicle barrier from both ends. So this kind of shows a perspective of what that concept can look like looking westward down Johnson Drive. And then this one's kind of more of a fully built out version looking east. So again, we're kind of seeing that canopy structure. We're seeing kind of a centralized plaza area on Reed's Road. And we're seeing the vendors kind of all congregating to that one area, that one plaza area, and then spreading out from there. And then this kind of over here, this was demonstrating that shade structure. So they would be in a similar location as concept A with the butterfly roof. The difference with this is instead of it being permanent, a permanent roof structure, it would actually be a rollout shade. So when you don't, or when you want sun, you can have that roll-up shade back. It allows sun to penetrate the street. And when you need shade, you can have that rollout shade come over and protect pedestrians and vendors from harsh sunlights. And then that's kind of the end of my presentation. I did want to give special thanks to Emily Randall for helping organize the Charette, and to Kevin Fulton for organizing our October Charette. And then I know we had our one vendor, and I forgot her name.
Rachel Feldkamp from Tasty Nuggets also joined us.
And then also I just have the list of our group here that I'm just going to read off. We have Amanda Moore, Brooke Craig, Chase Pittner, Emily Tilgerner, Jacob Lana. He was the individual who came, I believe, 2 months ago. James Everand, Jeremy Hoffer, Kyle Roger, myself, Laura Beth Cochran, Mark Nevlingler, Matt Turley, Randy Buhner, and now Randy Mixdorf. She recently got married. Tim McDowell, Tony McGrail, Valley Bear, and Zach Arndt.
Can we take another look at C?
Yes.
Because I have to jog my memory what the hell my question was.
No, all good. Just let me know when you're back to it.
Okay, I think right here.
Okay.
The area that you got X'd off there, you said was like a general.
This one right here.
No, the one in the middle on Reed.
This one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you call that like a central.
Like a central plaza area.
So what happens in the central plaza area?
So a few things can happen. Let's see. They unfortunately did not have a perspective. But if we go to that concept D, if we go to this guy, what it would be is you could have a kind of either semi-permanent or permanent structure there, like either just some steel post and a fabric structure above, or a more permanent structure. That provides an enclosure over that space. The other recommendation for that is you would get some kind of pavement there that kind of demarcates it from the normal asphalt street. This is a concept known as shared space in the street, so widely practiced within Europe, London, and it's now starting to make its way to the US. So what it does, and they actually demonstrate it really well here, is where you would asphalt street, your typical crosswalking, the moment you walk in that plaza area, it's either a pressed concrete or it's gray brick. It's some way to distinguish it from the rest. So on market day, that's when the vendors know, okay, this is our plaza area. This is where, you know, this is the central hub. This is where everyone's going to come to, you know, either go to the food truck court or go get fresh produce from vendors. So that would be how concept C would play out in that area.
Okay, so in C or D, you've got a structure there to provide shade over the whole area. And that you're proposing, or whoever drew the subs proposing, would that be some kind of a permanent structure?
Yes. And the difference.
So they're going to mess with Reed's Road when they're just not market day and they're using it as a street?
No, it wouldn't. So what you would have is, like, on a non-market day, you could still drive through Reed's Road, and obviously you'd have that structure high enough that, you know, vehicles can pass underneath it. But what it marks is similar to how the downtown Oakland Park market works and the red light works, is that those structures are there. You know, okay, when it's market day, I know this is full. But until then, you know, it's just a nice place to walk around. And the other thing too, between C and D, is C proposes putting that canopy over Reed's Road, as concept D says, no, we're not going to do it over Reed's Road because, you know, we may get semis down here. Instead, we're going to put them on either side of Reed's Road.
All right. Okay.
Okay, so if you're looking at multi-uses, which we try and indoctrinate within the city, if you use the one, then use it for something else too, what would you do with that all winter long with structure? I'm kind of trying to differentiate which part's staying permanent and which part's temporary.
And you're talking specifically with concept C, or just
the elements that make up your design, whether it be a canopy, whether it be poles, whatever. What would happen with those, the ones that are permanent in nature? What would we do during the winter with that?
So, like, what you do in the winter with this one? What you could do, I mean, again, throwing it out there, I'm free balling that. What you could do is, you know, depending on how you structure it. So if this is probably a fabric structure, I would say probably in the winter you're going to be taking down that fabric structure, and it's really there as kind of a demarcation of, you know, when it's hot and nice out, this is where the market is. If you decide to go with a more permanent structure, like let's say what is at River Market or downtown Oakland Park, you know, in the wintertime, you know, probably in this situation where it's over Reed, you would have a lot harder time figuring out, okay, what can we use this for? It's in the middle of the street. But on concept D, or even concept B, where it's either in that open space or on either side of Reed's Road, if it's a more permanent structure, you know, if you had something in the fall, that can be kind of, you know, like where you house the info center for a fall festival. Or if it's something in the winter, maybe that's also an area that, you know, a band can play in. So, you know, it again depends on how permanent or temporary you have that structure, but that would be one use that you could have it being year-round versus just a summer seasonal. Okay.
All right, any other questions?
What's the next step?
Right now we're just discussing it, and you know, we don't have any cost analysis on it yet. I don't know, Emily, do you have any other information on what kind of...
No, I mean, I think we were lucky that they wanted to spend the time,
yes,
and now we have the
Thank
ideas
you very much for that.
kind of for food for thought. And if there is opinion, you know, we can circle back and evaluate and look into costs.
And we knew kind of going into us, granted we're architects, we're not really all that good with costs. The contractors are, but really what we wanted to have this provide for the city mission was more a vision document. One that, hey, we never thought about doing this. Or, you know, or even, yeah, we have this market going, we don't know where quite to take it yet. So these are documents really to help you figure out where you want to go, and maybe this becomes a committee that, you know, kind of looks at all of these and then develops an RFP or whatever you want to do to develop a more permanent plan. Or maybe it's just, you know, it's just kind of a vision document that once you decide, okay, we're ready to move forward in the market, you can develop that RFP, you have an architect come in, you can always pull these up as, oh, these were designs developed a few years ago, you know, consider these ideas. And that's really what we wanted to provide to you. Just, you know, we, you know, as part of the Pillars program, we're this is kind of the first year that we've really done this outreach to help communities, help the Niles River Valley, the Urban Art House. This was kind of, having, the gracious welcome that we had to the city. We were like, well, all right, how can we give back? And this is what we figured would be one thing we could do.
Outstanding.
I do have one more question.
Yes.
If I may. Did you guys only look at that area that's based where they're currently doing the market?
Yes, we only looked at where the market currently is.
Okay.
Did you have a preference? Did any of them stand out particularly to you guys as this being the ideal situation?
So I worked on concept A.
Okay.
I'll put that out there. Just saying. But, I was working in the trenches for an hour and a half, and then once everything kind of came about, probably the most eye-opening for me, and I know a few others who I talked to had the same kind of revelation. The idea of having Reed's Road as your center and what Concept D proposes of having that central plaza area was probably the one that was kind of I never thought about doing that. As some of the other ones look at the more, all right, the market currently operates this way, we're not going to rock the boat too much, we're going to keep it that way. So I would say Concept D and kind of C are that they kind of rock the boat on changing where the central focus is of your farmer's market, as A and B go with where you currently have your plans right now.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Kyle.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
for having me.
All right, the next item this evening is miscellaneous stormwater repairs. Belger.
Thank you. Perfect.
That previous presentation, that was money well spent.
Yeah.
Bang for your buck.
Late last year, we discussed at a committee meeting a couple of stormwater failures around town. First one you see on your screens at 5820 West 61st Terrace, which is actually just right around the corner here from City Hall. 1940s vintage clay pipe had broken that yard here a few years back, which prompted us to make a spot repair that you see in those above photos. In the two bottom photos is another failure in that pipe. We had this pipe CCTV'd, and the guy who CCTV'd it said, I got about 50 feet down there, and we've got about 30 different failures that I've noted on the video. So he said that one is definitely a candidate for replacement. The second one is underneath the sidewalk on 51st Street, just west of Lamar. There was also a failure here a few years back where a joint had come apart, and our staff fixed that issue. And here, about 15 feet away from that failed joint, the pipe has failed again. So what we've done is we put it out for bid, these two repairs. We had 6 responsive bidders, with Pyramid Excavation being the lowest, most responsible bidder, an amount of $124,927.
27,927.
Engineer's estimate was $146. As just to note, there was a third failure that we'd also discussed, which is actually going to be addressed with the Fox Ridge project here this summer. So that one was not included in this bid package. But I would be happy to answer any questions you all may have.
I'm sure the information's in the packet, just don't recall it.
Sure.
But how long, on that first one, how long is that section of pipe that you're talking about going in place?
The first one,
Yeah. Because, well, the first one's already fixed.
we replaced that section of that
Right, I'm
pipe.
talking about this other section, how much are you talking about?
How much pipe?
Yeah. How long? 100 feet?
Well, there's two.
6 feet? Or?
the plans were included in the packet. There's actually 2 curb inlets in this stretch of pipe that'll be replaced with this project because, you know, pipe upstream and downstream of where it failed is all caved into. Like I said, it's 40s vintage clay pipe and it's basically kind of crushing in on itself. So we've asked GBA to basically include this run of pipe where it has failed and the 2 inlets that are failing too. And then on 51st Street, there's again 2 inlets, a manhole, and a good run of pipe that's getting repaired. All in all, if memory serves me correct, I think it's about 240 feet of pipe and 6 structures that are getting repaired. And the second one on 51st Street is corrugated metal. That bottom photo that was up there is basically where you see the bottom basically routed out of it. You almost got it. This one down a little more. There you go. So here's Woodson, 61st Street's down here, 61st Terrace is here. This project will replace this run of pipe here, put an extra curb inlet here, catch water coming down the hill. This stretch of pipe, curb inlet, the pipe in between. The first failure happened right around here. We replaced about that 20-foot section of pipe, that white pipe that you saw in the top photo. That next failure is here. But when they CCTV this line, that entire line's failed. Currently, there's no structure here where this bend is. It just bends underground, which standard practice is to put a structure in wherever a pipe bends. So they'll add that structure to make that right. These 2 old brick inlets will get replaced. You can go to the next one. It'll be 51st Street.
That section, the 20-foot section we put in there, didn't we spend like 20 grand or something to do that? What was that?
No, but our in-house staff did that.
Oh, we did?
Yeah.
Sweet.
Yep.
Sweet, it's gonna get replaced.
So you've got, in your bid document, of varying sizes of pipe, you've got 529 linear feet total between the 2 projects.
Well, we must have just been thinking about one. But this one, you know, we'll dive this line in, structure, pipe, manhole, and it'll go downhill. There's a structure, an existing structure down here that's in good shape. So get all that replaced. Gotta replace this piece coming out of the street.
What size pipe are we looking at?
Oh, it varies anywhere from 18 to 36.
24, I think, it looks like.
John, looking at the prices here, there's quite a difference. Can you give me some examples? Or do we know anything about this pyramid? Or I know Kissing, but I've never heard.
We did
Yes.
some work here before.
Yeah, a lot of times the difference you'll see in those bids, like I said, the engineer's estimate was $146,000. Engineers like to be right in the middle. They definitely don't like to be the low guy because then I ask them if they can go build it. And that answer is no. But to see it just below, not too far below the engineer's estimate, I mean, if it was way below, then I think we'd have a cause for concern. But I think these prices kind of fall in line. You'll see them kind of grouped down there, you know. Pyramid's 124, Kansas Heavy was 129. So they're pretty close. Westland was 140. And then a lot of those higher numbers, they'll put in a bid and yeah, I mean, a lot of times it's that or they're busy, and if, you know, they get it, you know, for that amount, they'll go ahead and do it.
So Pyramid did the work on the sinkhole?
That was Pyramid Contractors. This is Pyramid Excavation. There are two different ones, and it gets awful confusing. But
And
both are
he's as heavy as doing
Fox
the
Ridge.
Fox Ridge project.
All right, any other questions?
When can they start?
soon. Very soon. Gotta get contracts signed.
Anytime after July 19th contract approval.
Yep.
This may sorry, this may be out of the scope, but do we have an idea when we're in place, putting piping in? Is there any way to look down the road at some of the extending pipes, like 2 feet down? What if it's gonna erode next year? I wish there was a scope we could go down and find out on city-owned property where we have potential vulnerability on pipes breaking. We don't have any way to do that, do we?
You could have all the line CCTV, which would get pretty expensive. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that there's a lot of pipes that are probably to the point that they need to be replaced. We've done our best to try to stay ahead of these failures before they happen, and use the resources that we have in-house to kind of address them as we run across them. The issue you always have with stormwater is it's really, really expensive. We do have an inventory of structures. Doesn't really give you a good idea of the condition. Basically, when they inventoried those structures, they kind of looked down the pipe each way and said, you know, it looks okay, or that's in bad shape, or but corrugated metal pipe around town is kind of all the same vintage. Shelf life on that pipe's only about 30 to 40 years.
So they're doing replacement with like metal with metal, or PVC with PVC, or?
No, we're replacing everything with concrete. So anything that we've replaced in-house has been with concrete. The one that you saw, the 61st Street one that you saw, was with plastic. That was because the pipe was so old they didn't have that size of pipe anymore. And the only thing that we could use that was similar in size was the HDP, which is a plastic pipe.
How many miles of stormwater pipe do we have? Just roughly.
How many miles of streets do we have?
I don't know, but I can get you that answer.
You said it was expensive to do CCTV. Was there, you have a cost per foot for the CCTV?
The 2 CCTV runs that we did for these 2 pipes was about $900 for both projects, and that was about 500 feet. It's really time consuming, but I mean, I could extrapolate a number and kind of get an idea of what it would cost.
This issue is not going away.
No.
And it's not going to get better. So not knowing, I don't know what's worse, not knowing what's going to happen, or expending the funds to try to figure out what's going to happen. I mean, it's going to be expensive either way.
I think we pretty much know what's going to happen.
Well,
But how much?
It's not good when, yeah, we don't know when, but, yeah, we definitely want to address it sooner than later, instead of just hitting it like we're doing now. When one fails, you repair 40 feet of it, and then a month later, you got 20 feet down the line, you got it happen again.
Well, and you know, stormwater wise, it's like with these 2 projects, we're trying to get it to where we're taking care of a run, not just a spot. Get it from an inlet to an inlet to where, you know, that stretch is taken care of. You know, it's kind of the approach that we had with this one in the past. You know, it's kind of been in-house spot repairs on a lot of these things, and I think that we can get an idea, a rough estimate of how much we have and how much it would cost to inventory it all. like I said, it's my opinion that a lot of the pipe has gotten to the point where it's aged out. Its useful life is come and gone. And a lot of these projects, what we want to make sure that we do too is not only replace it from inlet to inlet, but make sure that what's there is what we need to have. Capacity-wise, you know, just system-wise, is it in the right spot? Is it functioning the right way? That's why we added that curb inlet on the 61st Street piece of this, was to get some of that water that all comes down the hill underground and in a pipe, so it's not, you know, overland flow and just causing street issues.
Do you know how many miles of street do you have?
We have 110 lane miles. Estimating stormwater off of that would be kind of hard because it meanders and it not often runs with the street. There's some streets that don't have any storm sewer.
Oh, really? Yeah, I heard they all have.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it, you know, is overland flow. I know there's a lot of long stretches of Millhaven where there's no curb inlets until you get to an intersection, and that's really the only place that you have one.
So,
but we can get those numbers.
So let's just ballpark it and say 50 miles of storm drain. That's just a figure we're using. You did, we're doing 500 feet, which is 1/10 of a mile. Not quite 50 miles. Yeah, 500 feet this year for $125,000. So you can extrapolate that out and say, holy moly, that's a lot of money. But just looking at the 50 miles, if you're trying to replace all the stormwater in the next, all of that up to the next 20 years, you got to replace, you know, over 1.5 miles of stormwater every year. Over 2.
We can resurface some of the, I think when we looked at the Black and Beach study, probably back in 2012, that laid out options that was looking at moving into the secondary system. I think we were looking at, outside of the main Rock Creek channel, an estimated $80 million of stormwater improvements or stormwater repairs. And then you start to layer the channel on that, you're probably upwards of $100 million over time invested in the stormwater system. And we do have, as John mentioned, we did do that stormwater structure inventory in 2005, and we can kind of take a look at that. That's working on the street inventory now. I think then we have to really turn our attention to sort of building that same asset inventory and condition list on the stormwater side as well. It is
a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
That makes us feel like every city's kind of in this thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
That don't make us feel good. We want to take care of mission.
Well, I know Overland Park took the approach. You know, they had 14 miles of corrugated metal left, and they were trying to take care of 1 mile of that a year.
Right.
You know, just trying to bite it off in chunks.
We could do that, knock it out in 60 years. I'm just saying. It'd be nice if we could come up with a plan to knock that out in 20, 25 years at the most, and figure what that's going to cost you, assuming no price increase between now and the next 25 years.
Well, I think you'll find too, it's one thing that we need to think about is coupling it with full depth reconstruction of streets.
Yeah.
Best time to do it. Because that way, you know, what happens with stormwater is a lot of the expense is just getting to it.
Right.
And then you have to repair everything that you had to go through to get to it.
So if you are doing that street,
Best time to do it.
The other thing is too, I think we're seeing some conversation at least in how far it will go or how long it will last within the SMAC program, that maintenance projects have not ever been eligible to be submitted and considered as reimbursable projects. And there's some move as the communities and the systems age to allow for maintenance projects to be considered a part of that. So that could be very beneficial to us in the future.
Do we know if there are any other grant programs or anything at a federal level, or any other stuff that we can try to look into on that?
We can look at, there's not much really specific to stormwater. It's been a while since we've looked, but it's certainly worth another look at that.
And we've tried to tie them to our STP projects, but again, that's your, you know, your Johnson Drive, your Lamar, your bigger stuff.
All right, anything else? Do you want to discuss it, or?
I think we should.
All
Not all
right,
consent.
let's put that. All right, next up is the Kenneth Place Streets Maintenance Agreement and Release. Laura Smith.
Yes, thank you. So it's hard to believe that we've sort of been in conversation with Kenneth Place since about 2014, at which time they approached us with a letter that they had from 1993 from Mayor Powell that talked about responsibilities for maintenance of the streets in their subdivision. So the streets in Kenneth Place are currently private streets, but an agreement was struck, and I put at your place this evening just kind of a bulleted list of kind of the high points of the agreement that's in your packet, along with that letter from 1993, and then minutes of the council meeting. So the mayor sent a letter, and then the council actually followed up and took action to take over sort of that intermediate maintenance of the Kenneth Place streets. Kenneth Place has been responsible over that period of time for snow plowing within the subdivision. So although we couldn't actually locate in the minutes the award of the contract, their records seem to indicate, and what we could determine seemed to suggest that the city participated in a street resurfacing in Kenneth Place in about the 2003 to 2004 timeframe. They were looking at, had approached us about doing maintenance again. We had some concerns. We were in the process of doing some core sampling in some of our other streets, and so we wanted to, in order to be able to have a conversation with the council, because the council had taken a position that maintenance of private streets would be the responsibility of the HOA as opposed to the city, and trying to just kind of work through this issue. So we did some core sampling of their streets, which indicated to us that there were at least sections that we didn't feel were suitable for a mill and overlay treatment, and that a seal treatment would be appropriate at this time, but then looking at the next major investment in the streets, they would probably be looking at a full-depth reconstruction of their streets. So we've gone back and forth. John and I have met on several occasions with representatives from their HOA board, kind of looking at the plans. They made a formal request to the City Council in 2016 to be included in the chip seal program for 2016, and the council did approve adding the streets in Kenneth Place to that contract at an estimated cost of about $10,000. As we got into the program for 2016, we determined that the chip seal equipment would not actually fit through the gates of the Kenneth Place subdivision, and so we started looking at alternative treatments, seal treatments that might be appropriate. And so John had researched a couple of options, and we provided, again, the HOA board with locations. They went to look at those seal treatments and did not particularly care for those. So we've been in ongoing conversation about, you know, what options do we have. They've also had some conversations, and I don't know with which particular street contractors, that would suggest that there are some contractors that are saying they could do a mill and overlay treatment on their streets. So as we looked at trying to move this forward, we had made the financial commitment to them. They're interested and concerned with having some intermediate maintenance to take place on the streets. So we suggested looking at an agreement that would allow us to reimburse them essentially for whatever cost they would spend on the street maintenance treatment, but would also, if they choose to move forward with the mill and overlay treatment and get into that situation and find that the streets can't support that, then they don't turn around and we don't have an entire subdivision of failed streets on our hands then. So we're willing to keep our commitment of the $10,000, but we want to make sure that if you choose a different route, that you understand that responsibility is going to be yours if you get into it, and it's more than you bargained for. So we were working to try to get that done so that we could get some sort of treatment done for them in this paving season. And so we had originally drafted an agreement, and we're in conversations and saying, let's get this in place, and then let's talk about a longer-term agreement where we more clearly outline the responsibilities going forward of the city and the Homes Association. We had a meeting with the Homes Association again about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, and they said, let's go ahead and try to get it all wrapped up in one agreement. So that's the things that are included in the agreement and release document. Talk about, again, the commitment of the funds that were budgeted in 2016, and we've set that up to essentially be a reimbursement. So we don't want to just make a $10,000 contribution to the Homes Association. We want to make sure that those dollars are spent on their streets. So they would hire a contractor. Once they hired that contractor, paid that contractor, they would provide us with proof of that payment, and then we would reimburse up to that $10,000 as a part of that. And then on an ongoing basis, we would agree to provide the following: pothole patching, a seal treatment, or the equivalent financial contribution in accordance with the schedule used for all other residential streets in the city. So I don't know the next time a seal treatment comes along and would be relevant for them, what those treatments will be. The equipment, their equipment may be sized such that it could get through the gates. And so what we wanted to do is really tie that to what are the standards and what is our protocol in the other residential streets in the city. So probably in the next 8 to 10 year cycle, when they would be due for a seal treatment again, we'll evaluate that against the treatments that we're using elsewhere in the city. And that we would, if we're doing that seal treatment, that our public works crews would do any crack sealing or sort of prep work ahead of that, including repair of curbs and gutters. And that was outlined in the letter back from 1993. And then we would acknowledge that as long as the streets remain private, we had conversations with them as well about would they be interested in making the streets public. And that doesn't seem to have much traction with the HOA at this point. But that they would continue to be responsible for snow removal and then any other street treatments, a mill and overlay or full depth reconstruction beyond just a routine seal treatment. So this agreement has been provided to them. I think it captures all of the terms that we discussed in our meetings with them and the things that they asked us to capture. Be happy to answer any questions.
Well, I might just add a word that Ron and I sat in on a couple of meetings with them, and they were very pleased and very happy with the solution. And then I was at their picnic last Sunday night, and they just think it's wonderful that we're doing this. So they're all very happy about it.
All right, thanks, Laura.
Take this to council. But not only consent.
All right. All right, thank you. All right, the next item up is the rental licensing program. Brian Scott.
Okay. Thank you. Just as kind of a way of a reminder, a little bit of a refresher. Last summer, Senate Bill 366 was adopted by the Kansas legislature and signed into law by Governor Brownback. And I will read this. The law specifically states no city or county shall adopt, enforce, or maintain a residential property licensing ordinance or resolution which includes a requirement for periodic interior inspections of privately owned residential property for city or county code violations unless the lawful occupant has consented to such interior inspections. So it's a little bit different than what we're currently doing with our rental license ordinance. So the change in the law kind of prompted staff to go back and look at reviewing that rental dwelling license ordinance and making sure it's compliant with the law, but more importantly, is it meeting all the objectives that were initially laid out 10 years ago when it was adopted. And at that time, my understanding, was quite a bit of discussion that occurred. There was actually a housing inventory that was done back in 2003. And one of the things that was kind of identified in that housing inventory was the condition of rental property throughout the community. I've heard that there might have been some complaints as well received from tenants about the condition of rental property. So that was a little bit of the impetus for the creation of the rental license ordinance that was adopted in 2006, 2007. At that time, there was discussion about inspecting both multifamily and single family. And there was a task force that was put together by the mayor at that time. And after quite a bit of discussions, decided that they would focus primarily on inspection of multifamily housing. So that's the way the program is structured right now. It's just the inspection of multifamily housing. But kind of reviewing that and keeping with the intent, the question arose, do we want to look at doing inspections of single-family housing? So we have seen some improvements with our multifamily inspection program over the years, where violations have gone down. We're not really sure exactly of the condition of single-family housing or what we see on the exterior. We're doing code enforcement in neighborhoods. I know at least one occasion where we received a tenant request for inspection and did that, and we found some issues, rotting window sills, etc. Those were addressed. We probably get about, with the entire rental inspection program, maybe 10 requests a year actually from the tenants to do inspection. And we talk with the tenants, try to determine what the issue is. We often suggest, why don't you meet your landlord first, see if you can address it with your landlord, or not, we'll follow up with actually doing an inspection. That usually results in probably about 5 actual inspections that we do, both multifamily and single family. So, we discussed all this with the City Council back at a work session October 26th, and at that time, we explored the option of going into a single-family rental inspection program in addition to the multifamily. So with that direction that we received from you all, we went ahead and made some changes to our ordinance that would reflect interior inspections for single-family rental structures that's consistent with the law. So we require consent of the tenant or the occupant to actually do the inspection. We looked at the impact that would have on our existing staffing. We believe there would not be any impact. We'd have to kind of shuffle some responsibilities that we do in the office with the current neighborhood services officers, but we believe that the 2 neighborhood services officers that we currently have that are doing multifamily inspections, we can do single-family inspections as well. That would be on a 3-year rotating cycle. And we believe that that will work out to be about 100 single-family rental inspections that we do a year. There's approximately about 330 or so single-family rental units in the city right now. We also suggested at that time, we discussed that with you in April, that we get the input of those that actually own single-family rental structures, or single-family rental units, excuse me. So we had a meeting on June 21st, actually 2 meetings, one in the morning and one in the evening. We had about 6 to 8 at the morning meeting, and probably had more about 10 to 12 or 15 at the evening. We actually invited, I should say there's 338 registered single-family rental dwellings. We actually sent out letters to 276 because there are some multiple owners inviting us to those meetings. Nobody was really pleased with the proposal, obviously. We kind of took note of a lot of the comments that we received. Question number 1 is what prompted the city to consider doing interior inspections of single-family rental dwelling units. How many code violations do we typically see with rental inspections or rental units? There was some concern that this might be in violation of the state statute that was just adopted. It seemed a little contrary to what was proposed in state legislation. There were a number of, I should say, owners that were present at these meetings who felt that when they buy property here in Mission for the purpose of being a rental unit, that they're investing in that. So they're correcting whatever violations may exist to bring that property up to presentable conditions so they can rent it. So they feel that they're making an investment in the property, and by doing that, they're making an investment in the neighborhood. Probably a little bit more to the extent that maybe some owner-occupied single-family homes are in the neighborhood. So there's a little bit of a feeling that, why are you picking on me? So they also kind of brought up concerns about existing enforcement of property maintenance codes. We explained to them we do a property maintenance code here in the city, and we do enforcement of that on a regular routine basis. But there's kind of a feeling that maybe that wasn't enough given what they were observing in the neighborhood. Some pointed out issues with derelict cars in the driveway, trash in the yards, etc. The things that we know that we do, especially in our neighborhood. There's a question about the standards that would be applying. The standards would be similar to what we are doing right now with multifamily. So we'll be looking at basically minimum life safety as well as welfare. So we're looking at things like foundation, cracked window panes or missing screens. We're looking at making sure that there's sanitary conditions in the house in terms of hot, cold water, that the toilets and the sinks are connected to a proper sewage disposal system, either a septic tank or the wastewater. We're looking at evidence of rodent infestation, so really things that would lead to just kind of minimal life safety or welfare for the tenant. There were a lot of questions about the mechanics of how this program would work. So we explained to them that again, it's a 3-year rotation. We haven't really set up how we'd be doing that rotation yet. When it's time for inspection, the city would call the owner, schedule inspection with the owner. They asked if the owner could be present, of course. Can the tenant be present? Yes. Again, we require consent of the occupant or the tenant, so they would have to actually sign that waiver that we're now utilizing for multifamily homes. They asked about cost. I think they were concerned about the cost of the program. Right now, we're proposing no additional cost for doing the inspections. There would be no increase in the fee for the license itself. But there was some concern that over time that cost will go up. And that may be the case. I'm not going to say never, but there may be a case down the road where we looked at the program and we evaluate the cost and come back to you all with a proposal for raising the fee for the license. But that's not what's proposed right now. They asked about staff and workload. As I explained, we believe we can do it with the existing staff that we have. And they asked about the qualification of the inspectors. We explained that the inspectors are certified under the International Council of Codes to do residential inspections, residential property maintenance. What's the benefit to me as a property owner? That was kind of a good question. Someone brought the suggestion of maybe doing kind of a self-evaluation or self-inspection, kind of reporting back to the city. Somebody else even asked if we could get maybe a certificate that shows that we passed the inspection, kind of a good housekeeping seal of approval, if you will. It's a novel idea. I never thought about it.
No, that was not discussed. There's things he's saying that wasn't discussed at the meeting.
Let me finish my thoughts. So anyway, those are the items that were discussed at the meeting. In my packet to you all, we've put together a few different options. The staff are really recommending that we proceed with option 1, and that would be to work with a smaller group of the single-family rental property owners to further explore our proposal and refine that a little bit, see if we can find something that kind of meets the needs of everybody. For questions, any questions?
Okay, so I was actually at the June 21st meeting, and there were a few things that I understood a little bit better when I left. And correct me if I'm wrong, because my notes are everywhere, but when we were talking about what prompted this, there's 2,712 units in the city, and 320 of them are houses. And the previous year had 10 calls with issues and only 5 inspections. So when I left, I kind of felt like there wasn't a problem with that would prompt 100 more of an increase of inspections for the next year.
So that's right. There's about 5,500 housing dwelling units in the city. And almost half of those are rental dwelling units, about 2,000 plus. And most of those are multifamily. So only about 330 or so are actually single-family rental units. When we commented on the number of complaints that we received, it was on average about 10 a year, and that's for both multifamily and single-family. And so those are tenants that are calling us with a concern or a question. So we're asking them, we discuss this with your landlord, maybe that's the first place you need to go to. If you don't feel you have a resolution to that, or if it's really such a strong concern, we'll be happy to do an inspection. So it's about 5 inspections a year. That's kind of about half the calls we get.
So we're thinking about going from 5 inspections to 160, 110?
Well, it's 5 inspections that are initiated by the tenant. So it's beyond inspections that we're doing already on multifamily, the required interior inspections we do on multifamily. So you can, see how many inspections we do in multifamily.
But yes, so when we put the multifamily program in place, we didn't base it on the number of calls that we were receiving from tenants. So we were looking at if the ultimate goal is to preserve the housing stock in your community, what is a reasonable rotation cycle that would allow us to complete the inspections that could be manageable from a staff perspective, as well as for the property managers. And so that's how we sort of landed on in the multifamily program. We inspect 5% of the units each year.
Which is about 125.
Actually, I was here when we worked on it, so.
But a couple of things. Councilmember Rothrock and I were the only ones at the night meeting. I don't think anybody got notification of that. That's one thing I'd really like to see us do a little bit better on, is letting everybody know, because those are our constituents out there. Any public forum like that you're going to hold, we need to be apprised of it. That would be really helpful, personally. And if I hadn't gotten a call from a landlord, I wouldn't have known, and I believe RC may be in the same position, so that would be real helpful. I did take notes, and I did follow up with the mayor after the meeting. I personally, I won't never tell anybody what my vote's going to be, but I can personally tell you, intervening in people's kingdom, if you will, their home, is government at its worst. I'm sorry. It is going overboard. There are single-family dwellings that are not rental in nature, that are owned by, that are deplorable, just like some could be rental. If there's a problem on the outside and the city's addressing it, the rental property, single-family that's owned, etc., if they're addressing all those and they're not being corrected, there are other options of dealing with that. But to automatically assume that we're going to go into every one of these properties, if the tenants all say yes, to me, it's almost violating personal space. And some of the all landlords are not.
If they're saying yes, if they're allowing you to do it, how is that violating?
Well, we haven't gotten to that yet. If they're allowing us to do it, that's because we have a program in place. We're not at that point yet. We don't have that in place yet. What I'm saying is, there are people out there, landlords are not all created equal, just like just like people who own houses are not. Some take care of them, some don't. But to say that a certain percentage need to be dealt with, and we're going to let other properties go exterior-wise, if we have a handle on every exterior maintenance problem, I'm sorry, I don't think we do. I don't think we have a handle on every city-owned property that's kind of out of compliance, whether it be a telephone pole, a wire, whatever. I just think this is going out of bounds. That's my personal opinion. You can, move it forward if you want. If there's a major problem, and we've seen a problem across the board in the community with rental properties, then I may be flexing a different way. But I sat there for the whole time, and some of it didn't come out kind toward the city, and I took away all that. I took away the emotion and all that. You've got to get away from that and go for what is factual. Is there violations that are pending right now that are causing the city to be not in compliance across the board. I took diligent notes, I have some of yours. Some of what you're saying, I agree. I don't think that's what he's saying, he didn't say. I just think it may be caveated a little bit differently. The checklist, I thought was a great idea. You know, if they're good landlords, let them make a list. If it's safety issues, we want to make sure there's no gas leaks and things like that. That's great. We may have that in homes where people aren't able to keep up their homes that own the homes. I just think we're going kind of overboard on the landlord part. And it became somewhat concerning to me. And the landlords that were there that were bringing up issues were, although they got a little emotional in the tone, some of the ideals and some of the things they presented I thought were right on track.
Kristen?
Absolutely.
In the way I think we've decided that everybody's, you know, okay, is I think we do have to concentrate on the outside first. And then maybe get a group of the landlords and we can kind of all sit down and say, okay, the checklist is a good idea, to where, you know, do a self-check and, you know, the city can be involved and just maybe pass around the checklist, say, hey, you've looked at these in the last year or so, just to keep it up, but work a little more closely with the landlords and see how that goes and see how that progresses. But for now, we do have to concentrate on the outside. That's what the single-family residents want. That's what they see. That's what their neighbors see. And then get that group together and just see how we can get that checklist and a self-evaluation. And maybe that's the, you know, 5% for right now. We can hand those out. The landlords can check those off, get them back to the city. I don't know, some way we can meet and get that established. And, so we can all work together.
How does the process work today? Let's just say if a tenant had some ongoing issue, the water heater's been out for 2 weeks and they can't get the landlord to fix it, and they call the city. Do you send an inspector in potentially at that point, or what kind of mitigation would we put forth there?
So right now, regardless if it's multifamily or single family, the tenant calls, describing the situation that you described. If you contact your landlord, yes, they've not done anything about it, then we would go ahead and do an inspection.
That's what we should do.
And
That's
let's
health
just-
and safety, you know.
Let's say we did the inspection, you found the water heater's out. What's the recourse there? What would the city then do to a landlord to put some pressure on to get fixed, or?
Right, so we would note that, you know, the hot water heater is out, that it needs to be fixed. We give a time period to fix it.
Letter goes out to the landlord at that point, or do you call the landlord or text them? Or?
We contacted, yeah. That's the whole purpose for having the license, is so that we have a contact person.
Sure.
The landlord, the owner themselves, or manager of that property. You need to get this fixed. You need to get fixed within very short time frames. That's very life-threatening. And then they'll be given a fine for $200. So,
I think, to me personally, if we have some recourse, you know, if somebody's got an ongoing issue and they can't get somebody to deal with it, we've got a program where they can call in and get the city to maybe step in and help. I think that's important. But I also noticed a number of the neighboring cities don't really have an ongoing inspection process every year either for the inside of places. To me, that seems like maybe a little too far if we're not getting a lot of complaints on that. If we're hearing 5 or 10 complaints a year after that.
So wouldn't this piece of legislation pass not to protect the owner, but to protect the tenants, truly? So it doesn't say anything about the owners. So the tenant has to let you in, see it, period. And that hasn't been violated too much, has it? There's not an over amount of complaints, or are there?
well, no. What we're doing now is we're requiring consent from the tenants of the multifamily units. So they're actually being asked to sign a waiver allowing us to come in and do the inspection. And that hasn't been an issue yet.
And if it's only 5%, that means once every 20 years, you're up for an inspection. If you're only doing 5%.
Probably a bit more frequently than that, yeah, but, so it's 5% within the building. So if you have a
The
small
multi-
building,
that's
it's going to be a little more
multifamily.
frequently as opposed to a large complex.
Susie, what you?
Well, I'd like to just throw some muddy the water, I guess, but I think we've got a lot of vacant houses that are not rental, that are just vacant. Landlords will let them sit there, and people that own them just let them sit there. And I think we ought to throw those in there in the mix as well. I mean, I don't know that we want to, pick on the rental people as such, but I know within 3 or 4 blocks in Millhaven, I think I counted, 10 vacancies. Their houses are just sitting there, and they're a mess. The backyards are horrible. So I think we need to concentrate on just the vacancies as well. I don't think we ought to just be picking on all, but I think we're looking at the whole house, but just including just vacant houses as well.
But for the exterior, right, we already have neighborhood
Yeah, the
services
codes
to
to
help.
help us do it. Or should be.
I mean, it should be, right? I think what we're talking about here is interior inspection, which is very different, going into a building instead of potential code violations.
When you have a bad exterior and it's vacant, you usually have a bad interior.
That might be.
But if we have all of these exteriors that are still not being tended to or whatever, why are we going to take on more and look in the interior?
Well, I think like Tom just brought up, this is for the protection and safety of the people who are living there, the tenants, not the landlord.
And then currently, I mean, we have something in place currently that still lets them call the city
Right,
if there's a problem.
right. I don't know.
Well, do we want to go ahead and look at working with a smaller group of single-family rental property owners and doing like maybe task force, or, I'm not sure if that's the right term, but
Does the staff have a recommendation?
That'd be our recommendation.
Number one.
What?
Yeah, so to work with a smaller group, and I will just say, I think if we can, I would like us to step back from characterizing this as picking on anyone, because I think
Right.
that sets up the wrong approach to the conversation. Our goal, whether it was back in 2006, 2007, the housing inventory was repeated again in 2014, the goal has been to maintain and preserve housing stock for the benefit of everyone in our community and the underlying property values, and looking at ways to do that. We may not go, extending the interior inspection program to single family rentals may not be the most effective or efficient way to do that. But we have seen success on the multifamily side, but I think that's why I think we would recommend going with option 1. Let's talk about what, I don't think that's a bad goal for any of us to work toward.
It's beneficial to the landlords and the residents of the city to keep housing stock up. They want to, we want to. So I think a task force or get a group together, a smaller group, to talk about that would be beneficial.
What do you think, they had the meetings, and the people that did attend, I mean, I don't know how many landlords we have currently that were not in attendance. That was another comment that came
We
up.
didn't have
They
enough notice. I got a letter on Friday, we're meeting on Tuesday, and I have to work. If you want to pay my salary, and that was the objection of a lot of the property owners, they couldn't make it because there was too short of a notice.
Well,
Now, that was very disrespectful to anybody.
and I think that would,
I don't
the
think that was
committee
made,
would
I
go
don't think that was
ahead.
done on purpose. It was just, the letters must have gone out late, and so we'll try to work together and get all this resolved.
If, one thing that I would make mention of, if we have a landlord that has multiple properties, say you have a landlord that has 50 of them, and 25% of those are the ones that have called in, then let's go deal with the problem person, instead of pulling everybody into one segment and saying, well, you own property, so there's a problem. I just don't, there's other ways of doing this, I think, to maintain harmony in the community.
Just because you're doing an inspection doesn't mean that you're singling them out as a problem.
Well, it does if there's a residential property
No,
right next to
it
them that's got
doesn't.
equal or worse problems.
It'd
It
be like
does.
having a restaurant and the guy comes in and inspects the restaurant. They're not doing that because they are picking on them or anything else. They're doing it to protect the general public.
Because that's a state law.
Well, if we aren't doing enough code enforcement, that's part of this conversation, if we're not doing enough code enforcement on non-rental property, that's another conversation and a, you know, a policy decision and direction that's a conversation that we can have.
I agree.
Sure.
I agree. That's maybe what we need to do, is do an inventory of where we have maintenance problems on the exterior, regardless of who owns them, and start saying, how long has it been that way? Have you had a multitude of complaints? What does the neighboring population look like? Are they all keeping their yards up? And this person has, there's a rusty shed in my yard, in my ward right now that I've called in several times, and it's just blatant, right out in front of the street. It's awful looking. That's not a rental property, it's an owned property.
Well, I think this committee will be very beneficial. Where, like I say, the landlords of the rental properties want their properties up as much as we do.
Yeah,
The good ones. And yes, if you have, you know.
How about the tenants?
The tenants, they can call, if they have a problem.
I know that, but they want them up too.
Sure, yes. And I think maybe we can do a program too to where you can let the tenants know if there's a problem.
Right. That's
You know,
what it is, some kind of.
First call your landlord, and if it's not, if they don't come and take care of it, by all means call the city, and we will.
Want to get that word out, so.
Yes.
Yeah, but you gotta follow the statute on that.
Um,
You have to follow the Kansas statute on that when you're dealing with tenants and landlords.
Yep.
Because
We
we had to
definitely
stop
will.
that last time. I'll remind you all that were around, that there's certain requirements that we have to follow with the state, and the judges will look at nothing else. If you circumvent the Kansas Landlord Act, they will throw it at us and take us out.
We will,
And
if
so
we're in
that
the
is
committee, we'll
huge-
discuss all that. We'll discuss it all.
Is there a
Yes,
sign-up sheet we can sign up on, be part of this?
Yep, I got a sign-up sheet.
You pass it around, or how we do
So what I'll do is, I got the sign-up sheet. If you two are interested in participating, we can do that tonight. I will send out a follow-up letter to all 276 or so that I sent out the initial letter to, asking for anybody that's interested, and then asking for name, contact, and then the date and time that kind of works for everybody. So we'll try to find something that's convenient for everybody.
And it will be a smaller group.
We'll give plenty of notice.
I would say, just so that if you see an agenda item, we've been holding off on some changes to our current ordinance that would line it up with some of the changes that were made. In practice, we have been getting consent before we perform any of the interior inspections, but our attorneys have recommended some language. I would anticipate that we would bring that forward to get that cleaned up as we work through this other issue, just to make sure we're sort of squared away from that front. So we'll make sure that we communicate. So if there's something that deals with our rental licensing ordinance, we'll be very clear that that's to square up that kind of that legal language, not expanding the program at this point to single-family properties.
So with us going with option number 1, it sounds like. Do we have to bring that to council or anything? Okay.
We'll kind of put together a plan, and then we can report back to you on maybe an appropriate time frame of how long before we would bring some recommendations back and feedback.
All right, great. All right, thanks, Brian.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
All right, so the final item on today's agenda is a sign,
Yes, so
and that's Laura's turn.
back in April of 2017, really early this year, we went through a process with the Planning Commission and the City Council, and the City Council adopted changes to the city's sign code ordinances in April of 2017. After the adoption, you asked us to sort of roll out communication to all of our business owners about what those changes entailed, so we did that. We offered up one-on-one meetings with businesses, and I think we had 2 or 3 business owners that took advantage of those meetings in May. And then we were positioned when the business license renewals went out to include information as well on the changes to the sign code ordinances. And it was a trifold brochure that was distributed. I think we included that in a packet for you all, or city administrator's report back then. And so, once we kind of got the word out on the street and felt like we'd had time to communicate those changes, we really started looking at enforcement. And the memo in your packet just kind of talks about the anticipated and the ongoing steps for enforcement. We've started some enforcement of temporary signs, particularly in sort of the attention, attraction, waving banners and snipe signs and some of those kinds of things along the main commercial corridors, Martway and Johnson Drive. We'll start to add in other segments of the community. Organized enforcement along Johnson Drive is expected to sort of start officially in July. And then beginning in the spring of next year, we'll do sort of regular commercial maintenance sweeps where signs are something that we're looking at. And you may remember that really until we went through this sign ordinance revision, we were doing sign code enforcement on a complaint generated basis instead of a more proactive basis. So those that we've been in contact with have all complied to date. And so didn't know if you, as a council, had heard any feedback since our April adoption or thoughts, comments on that program.
And I,
Didn't we vote on this and it was?
we did, but I asked to put it back
You
on.
seconded it and then it was a unanimous decision?
I know, I'm sure.
The planning commission gave us,
Anyway, I asked to have it brought back up again because I know I had several comments from people saying that well, they didn't really realize that we had that many pole signs and they really didn't make as much difference to them as it did the temporary signs because they were really a mess. And I know that I was one of the persons that wanted the pole signs down, but I didn't know that we had 27 pole signs either. So I mean, to me, I guess they didn't stand out that much. So the temporary signs really did bug me, and then I heard some other feedback from other council people saying maybe we should revisit the pole sign. So I'm just bringing it back again so that we can revisit it again, just to make sure that we're all on the same page and we know what we want to do.
okay, are we beating a dead horse?
No, I'm just asking it to be brought up again, which any council person can do.
That's true.
Does anybody have any comments?
We're looking for input
Yeah.
on the whole time?
Sure.
I think we've talked it over pretty well and had really good information brought to us by Danielle and others, including the entire sign inventory, which included all those pole signs. We're all well aware of having to work. And from what we originally had talked about doing, we modified that drastically, I think. And I'm happy with what we've done. I don't see any reason to make a change.
I agree.
Have we had any interest from anyone in taking advantage of the replacement fund yet, or anything?
We haven't yet, but I have not sent out the letter because Susie had asked to have this, and I thought if we're going to reopen a conversation, I'll hold off on sending that out. But I do have the list. Danielle has provided me with the list, and the letter's ready to go.
One of the things I think that needs to be discussed is the existing pole signs, for some reason, are very dear to the heart of people in Allen. I don't understand the sentimentality of it. And getting rid of those signs, they take that very hard. So we are, by passing that ordinance, we are going to hit hard at some of our businesses. And I guess, I didn't realize that when we had a discussion before, because I hadn't heard feedback. I have heard some feedback now. And so I think the thing that needs to be said is some of the businesses are going to be hurt by those pole sign removals. So I think that just needs to be in the back of our minds that as we did approve it, you're right, I agree. But there are going to be some very hard feelings with the business owners about these pole signs. So I just want to make sure that as we move forward, if that's the way we want to do this, because pole sign, to me, I'm somewhat ambivalent on them. I don't think they're great. I don't think they're the worst thing we have. So I don't have a strong feeling either way. But I think there is a consequence to that, what we did. And if we're good with that, then that's fine.
What do you see as a consequence? Because the way it is, they don't have to remove it all
Right,
until
we-
the business
Right.
changes.
You made quite a bit of concessions on that, I felt.
Yeah.
Right, so they are, I don't know, it's almost an illogical kind of endearment of the pole sign to the people that have it. And as we try to get rid of them, because I kept hearing the sentiment that we're going to get rid of these pole signs, as we attempt to try to get rid of them, we are going to run into the business community, and I think it's going to be hard feelings. So that was not what I had in my head when we discussed this earlier. But my eyes have been open. I'm not saying they need to be changed, I'm just saying we need to be aware.
Remind me, when we said that they don't have to go until a business changes,
Right.
is there anything in the ordinance that we put together that said someone can't improve what they currently have as long as they still have it?
There's a limit to the maintenance that can be done on the sign, and it's, at this point, and I've got some copies of the definitions if you want them. But it says, normal care, minor repair that is necessary to retain safe, attractive, and finished structures is included in sign definitions. And then if you look at the section that deals with non-conforming uses or non-conforming signs, which is what a pole sign would be at this point, it talks about that non-conforming signs can have sign maintenance performed as long as the work within a 12-month period doesn't exceed 50% of the value that has been established for the sign. So there's still some tie to, you know, not putting more into it than the actual structure brackets would be worth at that particular time.
But short answer, yes, they do.
Yes, sorry.
Well then, people who currently have pole signs that are totally attached to them, unless they're turning their business over, it doesn't impact them, right?
That's what I'm saying.
Okay,
I understand.
then is there an issue?
And we propose this, giving them some incentive, even though it's not a massive amount, so I mean, just to get them up. When you drive into Mission from the east, and you're welcome by that nice car wash sign, and it's going to look great if they ever get the gateway built. It'll be just wonderful.
Except you didn't know we had as many pole
I
signs.
didn't know, I didn't have the count, but I
You
knew
did
that
not,
there were
that's
like
right.
troops.
You didn't know
so
until
I
somebody
like-
pointed out to you that we had 27 pole signs. So, you know, I don't think they were that noticeable, and I think the temporary signs, and if you remember, Will Vandenberg preached on that for 2 years. So, yeah, I know, you got a mentor. So anyway, but how often did Will Vandenberg bring it up that he wanted temporary signs on? I mean, we heard that for weeks, for months, for years. So I just think that everybody kind of decided that, okay, temporary signs are worse than pole signs right now because you don't see as many as you thought you would. So I'm with Ron. I just think that we just need to remember that we do have businesses that these signs are broken.
Right, I guess I'm at a loss to understand what the issue is then. If they're not leaving and they're staying and they're happy with what's there, there's
They
not
can
an
spend
issue.
50% of, over a year's time, they can fix their sign, and then the next year they could put more. So if the business is
That part
staying,
has not changed from the way it was before, I don't believe it.
No,
I think
that part
it's
did
That's
not.
actually the same as it was, so we didn't do anything to that.
businesses will not lose their signs unless they,
Vacate.
yes. That's why we made the concessions, because we did listen to the business community, and they said, we want our signs.
So we're also providing some
we changed
incentive as well.
So we changed.
So go back to the comment you made about the year. What happens in the
They can
next year?
spend, what did you say, Laura, 50% of the sign in a 12-month
In a
period?
12-month period.
So,
So it really doesn't take a pole sign down.
no, not unless they move. Not unless they sell their business, or they go out of business, or,
The business
So-
changes.
Okay.
they would not have any attachment because they would not be there.
I must just be missing something.
So the only
because I
change that we made relative to pole signs in this last go-around was we added a sentence in the sign maintenance section that allowed for, because if you were changing a business name, it didn't qualify as sign maintenance before. And so we added the section there that said, if the information, product, or service depicted remains the same, this is previous language, and if the sign is to serve the identical establishment using the same business firm name as before the change. That's where the previous ordinance ended. And then we added the sentence, maintenance may include a change in name on the sign due to corporate merger, consolidation, or other legal name change. So that was the only change that we made in this 17 go-around that impacted pole signs.
I think, like I said, I think we listen to the business community. Right. We don't want to hurt the business community. Yes, and so.
Are there any business owners out in the audience that want to speak to that?
You did listen to the business. I mean, the thing is, I think a lot of people are wrapped up in what was talked about and none of it happened. So that's still out there. You didn't change it.
No, the only really obnoxious thing for Mission are the temporary signs.
Yeah.
That is what it's like a third world toilet. And it's not sitting just on the business district. It's also sitting in residential. I brought it up at one of the meetings. I talked to RC, I don't think anything's been changed on that. So it still looks like a third world toilet, driving down the strip. Sorry, it is what it is. We spent millions of dollars to beautify and change our environment. It's great. I love seeing a lot of the eclectic shops showing up and more activity. Yet why our city is allowing those temporary signs and no other city is beyond me. And it still wasn't addressed. 2 years ago I was told that they'd be addressing it, so they stopped enforcing any ordinance dealing with signs, so it progressively got worse. And that came from the words of ordinance people, the coast people. Why is these signs that were totally violating, and they said they were stopped, they could no longer enforce. So,
Well, we will have to.
Yeah, I think that's being addressed in stage 2, which is currently ongoing right now.
all right.
So I'm expecting to see some improvement definitely in regards to that. But yeah, that's stage 2, which is going on through June, July, and August, right now.
Now, I tried to find the follow-up meetings when I went onto the website and I could not find, so I've heard that there have been follow-up. How do I find out about those? Because I went looking online and could not find anything prior. And I asked RC about it too.
You want to address that?
Danielle?
Yeah, she's.
Did we send to business license, occupation license holders?
We're not having additional meetings, they were just provided additional information.
Right. Well, you offered yourself, you made yourself available if anybody wanted to come in to talk about. So the people who had business licenses received a notice of those changes.
Okay.
We did have the meetings back before we voted on it.
November, right.
We did have a series of other public meetings where people came, and that's in fact what resulted, I think, in some of the decision to move away from a strict amortization policy, particularly on the pole signs.
So with that being said, I'm getting the impression that we're going to keep the language intact and not make any adjustments to what we voted on, I believe in April.
I'd be willing to listen to an argument, but I haven't heard one yet, so.
So, Laura, do I just,
anything, it's just discussion.
I think that's,
just a discussion?
yep, that was just a
Okay.
discussion item.
All right, any other discussion regarding the sign code? All right, thank you. Laura, do you have any department updates?
I know very quickly, because I know we've got a lot to cover in finance and admin, but I'm pleased to announce, and I don't know that we have the time scheduled, but John and his staff have solicited quotes, and we will be painting the traffic signal pole at Belmore and Johnson Drive.
They don't want me to go paint that.
So also, just very quickly, you may hear, and we're working on something that we can put out. There were 90 some odd property owners along It's basically stretching behind kind of Mission Bowl up Rock Creek Lane through there that received or will be receiving a summons notice for an action that is being taken. We own some property along there, so we had a copy. The mayor had also brought me a copy of the summons that he had received, so I can make that available to anybody who wants to see it. Laura McConwell is representing the Kasich brothers who own the property at 5925 Knoll, which is the commercial building that sits right there on the corner of Knoll and Martway. And what they have done is they are petitioning the court to basically remove or exempt the parcel that their building is on and the parcel that their parking lot is on from a declaration of restrictions that was filed when the subdivision was platted back in the 40s. That required all of those families to be used for single-family residential use only. The original plat exempted those lots. Over time, it got replatted, and the legal descriptions changed, and everything didn't square up, leaving those parcels with that single-family restriction sort of hanging over their head. I think this has probably come to light because that property is for sale, and my guess is as potential buyers are looking at that, there may be some questions about title. But we will be putting together, I don't think, if people don't want to oppose that, it's been a commercial property for the last 40 years. The restrictions have not been challenged, and so the petition is asking the court for a declaratory judgment just to remove those two parcels and those two parcels only from that requirement. So you can certainly direct people to us if you get calls. I know some of you have had calls or questions already. We've had some calls and questions as well, but kind of get the complete response and get that back out to you so you have that, answer anything else that comes forward. And I think that's it.
And John, thank you for the stoplight at Broadmoor and Smartwood.
When's that going to be started?
I think it should be on.
It is.
Oh, I couldn't miss it. I was driving today, somebody turned, and I thought, where'd that sign?
It's on.
Great.
I have a draft of a letter sitting on my desk right now that will go to sort of address use of sidewalks in general, including storage, and then we had a couple of other issues that popped up.
All right, that concludes me of the community development.
Good job.
Okay, I know we're running a little bit behind here, but we'll call our Finance and Admin Committee meeting for Wednesday, July 5th. We've got a couple discussion items on the list here. The first one is an overview of current incentive requests for the Mission Trails and Gateway projects. So Bruce Kimmel and Laura Smith will have some stuff to present to us on that.
I'll just invite Bruce Kimmel with Ellers, our independent financial advisor. Just going to kind of run through. You should have a copy of his PowerPoint presentation at your place. If you don't, let me know. I'll get you one. Just kind of get us ready for, last week we talked about kind of getting a series of meetings scheduled over the next several months. So kind of go through again just that high level overview of what we'll be considering and our tentative timelines at this point.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks for having me, everyone. You've already seen some of this information. I included it in the packet just for continuity and for the folks that haven't seen some of these slides. So I won't go over everything, but please stop me along the way if you have questions. I've also tried to cut out some of the really nuanced detail and stick more to the high level. We want to revisit some of the concepts with economic development here in Kansas and specifically in Mission, and then talk a little bit specifically about the Gateway Project and EPC, knowing that there'll be lots and lots of discussions to come on both of those. So you know who I am. I'm with Ellers. We're independent municipal advisors, so we're not affiliated with a bank or any financial institution or any developers. All we do is work for cities, counties, school districts, and other public entities on bond finance, financial management, and a lot of economic development. So, you know, as you think about development requests, and I work with many, many communities, both medium-sized communities like Mission as well as bigger communities, smaller communities, and it can be really easy to get overwhelmed with development proposals because there's so many competing factors and things in play all at once. You know, you've got the development plan, what they're proposing to build, and the cost estimates with that. You might have some public infrastructure that is required, and so there's questions of, will the city do that, or will the developer do that? Will there be assessments? Will there not? There's sometimes impact on public services. I worked on the IKEA project next door. You know, the city of Merriam had a lot of questions, at least initially, about what would this mean for both public works and public safety to have that type of development in their community. Of course, there's financial and practical capabilities, and we've all had numerous discussions about that relating to certain developments. That's a really key factor and a question mark in a lot of communities. There's the public revenue potential, and by that I mean sales taxes, property taxes, transient guest taxes, other, in some cases, franchise fees and other revenues that are potentially going to be generated by a project. Some of those revenues might be applied towards the project, some would be collected by the community, and that mix or that balance is in question oftentimes. And to that point, what are all of your options for funding either private and or public costs, both upfront capital as well as operating costs? And there's any number of ways you can go with that. But ultimately, the question is, how do you best balance risk and reward? And that's what I'm here to help you guys figure out is, with any development deal, if you want to go forward, are you getting a deal that you feel is comfortably balancing the risk to the city with the reward, and hopefully has much more upside potential in terms of reward than risk or cost to the community? But ultimately, however that balance plays out and what we bring forward, if we bring something forward at the end of the day, you will really have a clear sense of how we evaluate that risk and reward balance. Well, and so then to make matters worse, as I put it, oftentimes, not sometimes, but oftentimes, developers will come forward with a plan and say, this is exactly what we need. We want this property TIF, we want this sales TIF, we want a CID. We want IRBs, we want transient guest tax, whatever the case might be, and we've got it all packaged together and ready for your consideration. And that can cause a lot of paralysis, and understandably so, because if you don't have a framework for asking the right questions, or questions that will give you the confidence to make a decision, you're either going to say no and potentially regret that, or you might say yes and always worry about having provided too much incentive to get the project done. So what we're trying to do is help you avoid that kind of paralysis or that kind of second guessing at the end of the day. There really is no one-size-fits-all approach. Sometimes governing bodies will ask, well, how much TIF does a community typically give to a hotel project or a retail project or a residential project? And really, each project, each community has its own unique situation. We have benchmarks on what development costs should be, on what kind of rates of return a developer can reasonably expect in order to put in their own equity and to take on the debt obligation. But ultimately, the solution needs to fit your community and your priorities, your situation as a redeveloping community, and then your existing debt obligations, what debt capacity you have, and so on and so forth. So as you look at how you want to participate, if you want to participate in both the EPC, the Mission Trails project, as well as the Gateway project, now that we're here in 2017 looking at both of those projects anew, we really want to focus on helping you answer a series of questions, moving from high level down to very low level, or from strategic down to tactical. So I highlighted the first three in green because I think you've really already spent a lot of time as a community looking at these questions, but really you have to start with the question of, is economic development, is redevelopment a priority? And we can of course discuss the merits of this, but I think City of Mission has said, yeah, because of where you're at as a redeveloping community, you are open to considering public participation in economic development. What types of development are higher priorities? It's clear that you've said you want mixed use at the Gateway site, something that is going to be economically sustainable, providing goods and services as well as residential options for people in the community as well as the greater area to attract people to Mission. And so both of these proposed projects here in 2017 seem to fit that bill, at least in general terms. Are there specific areas of the city where you want to focus on development more than others? Well, this area where both Mission Trails and the Gateway projects would be does seem to be a high priority area for the city in your commercial core. So then, those are the easy questions, seemingly easy questions, but would welcome any discussion on those. Then we really start looking at the specific projects, right? And these are still foundational level setting questions, but looking at each of these projects, what are those costs and benefits that this project would present? Looking at the Mission Trails project and the Gateway project individually. And, would those benefits be at risk if something transpired to change the situation? And if you do have costs or risks, how can those be mitigated? So, looking at those costs and benefits, but also trying to do some sensitivity analysis and thinking about what could change for better or for worse. Another question, a foundational question, but an important one is, does the developer have the resources and the commitments, perhaps from tenants, perhaps from financing institutions or equity providers, to complete the project, and will they be a capable development partner? We'll be getting into that a lot more with both the EPC and the Gateway project. But after answering those five,
how do you
yes.
determine that? Do they put them over their financials to you?
Yes.
Audited financials?
It depends on the situation. Sometimes they're audited, sometimes they're not. But we can look at a number of different sources of information, both bank statements, income tax statements, audited financials or unaudited CPA numbers, and try to ask directed questions to really gauge. I think in both of these projects, you're really going to be looking at, do they have the bank financing lined up, and for the equity contribution, where are they getting that equity from? Those, I think, are going to be the really key questions. So if you get over the hurdle of those questions, if you think these are good projects or projects that could really add value to the community, then here we go with sort of the more specific questions about city participation. At a philosophical level, is the city willing to participate? I'm not saying how much or how or for how long, but do you entertain the idea that there's a gap, that there's a need for some level of city participation? If you say yes to that, then we actually try to define that need by doing a performa analysis, looking at their development budget, their operating performa, which is basically a cash flow with revenues and expenses, making certain assumptions about how that will play out along with debt service, so we can get a sense of what kind of profitability the project would have with either no incentives, no city participation, or with the full amount of what the developer is asking for, or something in between, right? So we can gauge what is that gap and that justification for city participation. And we often call that the but-for test. But for X level of participation, this project is not likely to go forward. That's not to say that any project couldn't happen, but that what's being proposed here, the project that you're being willing to consider, would not happen without X amount of gap filling. And if you believe there is a gap and that we've helped to answer that question sufficiently, then here's a really key one. The developer, again, has a specific idea of what incentives they want, but we really want to look at all of the options available to the city for filling that gap reasonably. Because there might be a tool or a combination of tools that works better for the city, still gets the job done, and leaves you more capacity to fulfill other needs in the future. And we want to find the best possible combination of tools, whether or not they are similar to what the developer is originally proposing. So identifying that set of tools is crucial. And then finally, what kind of negotiated public-private agreement really allows that project to move forward in a win-win fashion, giving that private developer the confidence in the incentive to actually put their equity at risk and to take on that debt financing with the idea that if they perform, they'll have a reasonable expectation of a reasonable profit, but also advances the city's priorities and makes sure that you get return on investment too. That's a really key point. We spent a lot of time on that back in 2012 and 2013 on the city's return on investment, and we absolutely want to resurrect that with the city's consideration of these projects.
Bruce, if there's a project, say, that's gone on for a period of time, I don't know what that would be, but down on the East End, what time frame do you use to ensure your analysis is correct? It may have been X on this date, but 5 years later, it's taken on a different breadth. And now it's even different in terms of vulnerability of the city and a variety of things. How often does your firm get involved to come back and say, okay, I've done an updated analysis and we are here. The risk factor was here at this point and now it's over here.
It's not frequent, but it has happened. I'm working on a project in Minnesota that is on its 4th iteration right now. It's a big vacant site with a lot of challenges, and those are the ones that typically don't happen right on the first crack. Right. But yeah, we will look at the city's current situation. You've done a fantastic job of replenishing city reserves and managing the debt obligations that you took on for the stormwater at the gateway. So I would say that you're still definitely not in a situation of needing that development in particular to happen in order to be sustainable as a community. But we will want to look again at what your profile is, how you might benefit from this project, and what the risks would be. So we're really looking at this from scratch and looking at the developer's numbers from scratch as well. Okay. So, and as you might know, they're still cogitating on a few things on the Gateway project, but I'm probably talking at least twice a week with the development team about their numbers, looking at some of their past expenses and trying to get a handle on what exactly those are, for instance, so that I can come to you and walk you through some of those and make sure that you're understanding what they think is reasonable for reimbursement.
So as you look at ongoing plan iterations, you would be able to tell us, okay, I had this level of confidence with this plan. As we move from plan to plan, the confidence level either maintains, goes up, goes down.
Okay, I see what you're asking. I think we've learned a lot from the few iterations of working on this project and with this developer. And I don't know if I'll be giving you a confidence meter per se, but certainly I think we're all smarter, both city side and your consultants, to ask better and more pointed questions to make sure that we're not bringing forward something that we're not reasonably certain has a chance of succeeding. Of course, there's always something that can fall out of bed, but I think you're going to see definitely a more robust obligation on the developer's part to really show us more more of those tenant commitments that they have, as well as financing lined up ahead of time.
Thanks.
So that's really sort of the overall framework. Are there any other questions about that before I touch briefly on the financing tools? And I won't spend too much time on TIF because I know you've all heard it before, but again, wanted you to have the information.
Just a quick question. So when we get to the end of this process,
Yeah.
what is your deliverable to us? You know, if it's not a confidence meter, it's a rate of return. I guess what are, at the end game, what are we looking at?
Sure.
Are you making a recommendation to us? Are you giving us the information? How do we get to that end?
Sure. The end point, and please jump in, Laura and Brian, is going to be a redevelopment agreement that will have terms and conditions of what the developer promises to do and what the city promises to do if and when the developer meets certain milestones. And some of those city deliverables will be, putting, I'm speculating here because we haven't been negotiating a development agreement yet, but some of those city deliverables might relate to TIF financing and CID financing and the use of industrial revenue bonds, which I'll talk about in a minute. But those will be the terms of the deal. And then you'll also, Ron, have from Ellers a pretty extensive report on what we think the cost-benefit analysis is for the city and what are the risks and rewards associated with that, and similarly for the developer and why we think the proposed level of incentives is appropriate for the project.
And
So,
I have that multiple page agreement, or sort of his analysis that was provided in 2013, and I'm happy to redistribute that if you want to take a look and kind of just get a feel for what that looks like, because it talks in narrative form about the specific points that then are incorporated within the development agreement.
And I think we'll talk a little bit more than we did last time about how things could either get better or worse as well. We did more of that sensitivity analysis as we went through 2013 and into 2014, but I think it makes sense to include more of that granularity up front here in 2017. Okay, yes?
I just have one more question. You said that you would help identify the public tools that are available to help fill that gap. So are you saying that you also have the ability to identify if whether or not they actually need an incentive to complete the project?
Yes, absolutely. And there are cases in which we run our numbers and say there just isn't a justification for participation. I mean, I will say here with the gateway, because of the many iterations of this, we have a lot more work to do on the numbers, and I'll be reporting back to you on that. But I think they're showing a need. The question is, how much of that need does the city reasonably think it's your responsibility to help fill? Responsibility is maybe not the right word. It's how much of that need do you think you need to fill in order to get the deal done? And that's really the question. It's going to be a unique situation because they probably have more need built up over the last 10 years than really is reasonable for the city to help fill, right? And so hitting that balance is going to be the unique part of this. The Mission Trails project is a little bit different. That's coming right out of the chute, but they also have some unique circumstances with their site development, with the structured parking that's part of the proposal. And I'll be talking to you more about those costs, and you can decide whether and how you think it's appropriate to help level that playing field in terms of making that development a reality. But we've got a little ways to go on that. Okay. So, TIF. I will not try to channel Gary Anderson and give you a TIF 101 here. But what I wanted to just emphasize is that with TIF, whether you're looking at sales TIF, with the city's 1% general sales tax, or property TIF, you're really looking at utilizing all or a portion of those incremental new revenues towards TIF eligible expenses, right? And it's going to be really key to make sure we understand exactly which costs are going to be paid with TIF, and do you feel like that's an appropriate use of TIF? So we have more work to do on that, but I wanted to emphasize that. And as you may recall, that's up to a 20-year TIF project area. So any questions on TIF? I can bore you to tears, but I know it's already late, so I'll keep moving. You may recall we've talked about funding methods before. There is an approach called pay-as-you-go, where you enter into a note with the developer and say, we will provide you with sales TIF or property TIF over time in an IOU fashion, basically, but no bonds are issued up front. So developer, you're paying everything up front from your own debt and equity, and then we reimburse you as those TIF revenues become available. Conversely, there's bond financing, both special obligation TIF and general obligation TIF bonds. You may recall that SO bonds, as we call them, are limited obligations, really backed solely with revenues, sometimes with an annual appropriation pledge, but basically just saying, here are the expected TIF revenues. Investors are making their investment decision based on that revenue stream. General obligation, you still use those TIF revenues, but you are also backing that kind of bond with the city's full faith and credit, and therefore the interest rate is much lower. Now you might say, well, why in the world would we ever want to do a GO bond instead of an SO bond? Because this is less risk to the city, right, than with GO. And GO, we can offset some of that risk with developer guarantees, but not all of it. With the GO bond, there is more skin in the game. Well, if you think about your TIF dollar and what it can go for, either paying down principal, paying interest, or being freed up faster for the city to do something else with it. With SO bonds, more of that TIF dollar gets sucked up with interest, right? Because the investor is going to require a much higher interest rate than they would here to buy that riskier bond. GO bonds are more efficient, i.e. less interest, more dollars going towards principal, frees up the revenue stream faster. But it's a policy decision ultimately on whether you want to go all with SO, and that's perfectly acceptable and could be very appropriate on the Gateway project. But I want to make sure that we're fully aware of what those trade-offs are. So there'll be more to come on that. CID. Back to big font on CID. You can finance just about anything with CID in Kansas. As you recall, it's typically an incremental sales tax up to 2% that can be collected for up to 22 years. Most CIDs aren't a full 2%. On the Gateway, I think they're now looking at a uniform 1%, right? But you also have a lot of flexibility on where you can use CID dollars. Usually it's on the project, but it can sometimes be on infrastructure outside of the CID as well. And it's really self-imposed by the property owner. They have to petition to put it into place, but the city does approve it.
So
and then,
what's the basic difference? I mean, self-imposed is one between a TIF sales tax and a CID sales tax.
So with TIF, it's a great question. With TIF, you're capturing the new sales that are based on the sales tax from the 1% general sales tax that's already in place, the new sales at the Gateway, for instance. With the CID, that's a supplemental additional 1% sales tax on top of the city sales tax. And so that just goes into a different bucket. Then finally, IRBs. This is kind of confusing because they're bonds. You think they're real bonds. Well, it's basically a transaction between the city and the developer in most cases in order to get sales tax exemption on construction materials. It's still part of the but-for test. We want to make sure that if you're going to provide it, it's reasonably needed because you are foregoing sales tax in that case, even though most of it is at the state level. But the key thing is it's sort of an inside transaction and they're not full faith and credit. Okay, so it has no bearing on the city's credit or your obligations. It's really just sort of a private side deal to get that sales tax exemption. Okay, so starting with the Mission Trails project, drilling down to the two projects at hand. You've got an existing TIF district, as you're aware. Mission Trails is in that? No, it's not. Okay.
We created a TIF district. for this project.
So we will
scratch
get that.
bullet number 1.
We will get that fixed. You will be considering approval, if you want to go forward with this, of a TIF project plan specifically for the Mission Trails project and IRD issuance, both of which have been requested. This kind of is off the page, but I just wanted to emphasize on both this and the Gateway project that if that kind of a development agreement seems feasible, you will decide, not the developer, how you put your incentive resources into play, both the amount and the structure of that participation and the duration, and put those terms into the redevelopment agreement.
And at this point, their request includes pay-as-you-go financing. They have not made a request for any bond financing in connection with this project.
Looking at dates, these dates are not completely nailed down, but we think we have a path forward on this. We'll be back with you for a work session on proposed deal points, so we will have completed almost all, if not all, of our analysis. Before that point, had some discussions with city staff as well as the development team, and go over where we're at on the 19th. You're also on track already to have that public hearing on the TIF plan on the 19th during your regular council meeting. I think it's fair to say you probably wouldn't be asked to approve the TIF plan at that point. I think we would like to wait until everything is queued up on August 16th to do that. We'd come back on August 2nd to Finance and Admin to discuss that proposed development agreement, but really look for your feedback, questions, concerns, see if we're on track or if you think tweaks are appropriate based on the analysis and the discussion. And then have that consideration, not necessarily approval, but consideration of that development agreement, plus all the other incentives not yet authorized. So that's where everything would come together if you think this clears the hurdles that we've discussed earlier. Any questions about Mission Trails? Okay. So then we're contemplating a longer process with Gateway. I know that bullet point is right. All right, so you had that district set up in 2006. There have been a couple of iterations of TIF project plans, including right before the January of 2013 approval, along with the CID plan and IRB issuance. Any new development agreement would require amended or new versions of all of those tools to be approved, right? So you're looking at the overall deal, but also having the opportunity for public hearings, public comment, public questions about each of those specific elements as well. And then also, because there is a hotel component, they are asking for utilization of transient guest tax. So we'll be including that in our analysis and recommendations as well. And then again, the same caveat, for all of those tools, you decide whether and how to utilize those and what kind of return on that investment you're looking for. So then a little bit longer process on Gateway envisioned, and this is really all predicated on them continuing to move their proposal along. All of their numbers, all of their tenant obligations, all of their other elements, so that we can continue to refine our analysis and really come to you with something that we think holds water in terms of a complete evaluation. But looking to have a council work session as soon as next week on deal points, probably starting with their request and our initial thoughts on that request and where we want to probe further. Come to the August 2nd Finance and Admin Committee on those same deal points. Have another work session on August 9th. So between the work sessions and the Finance and Admin, sort of a progression of analysis and looking at specific tools and how they can be put together. You'd be on track to have a public hearing on the amended TIF plan on August 16th. That would be just, again, the public hearing, not the approval or formal consideration of that TIF plan.
And the public hearing on the CID petition that same evening.
Great, thank you. And then going into September, looking at that proposed development agreement, assuming we can get to that point on September 16th. And then finally, September 20th, looking at that development agreement and all the associated incentives.
Now, Bruce, will you be running an analysis and a recommendation through Pete Heaven, our land use attorney, before we get to this point?
Oh, definitely. So both Pete Heaven and Gary Anderson have been in consultation with myself, with Laura, with Brian, and we'll continue to do so on both the Mission Trails project and Gateway, making sure that both the legal requirements for these elements are being satisfied, as well as, especially in negotiating that development agreement, that we're asking the right questions, and again, mitigating as much of that city risk, maximizing as much of that city reward as we can.
So will you be doing a summary or something for us prior to that?
Oh, definitely. So where we expect to have an all but final development agreement is on September 16th. Now, there's still a chance to tweak, renegotiate, scrap, whatever, based on your feedback from that meeting, but the idea is that by that point, we should be pretty darn close to what we think makes sense and would lead to a viable project, right, that we have a fairly high confidence in. And then, again, that gives us a little bit of time to make any final changes and brings something to you on the 20th.
Thank you.
Pat?
Bruce, the August meeting there on the 9th, that work session, are you going to be at that?
I will be.
Okay. Because I'm assuming that we'll have a lot of those issues hammered out, worked out by that time, not wait.
Yeah, and
we're going to be running.
right, I'm actually expecting to be at all of these meetings.
Okay.
So right now, we have, for example, Pete has drafted development agreements for both projects, and those, we've provided the draft to the EPC team for sort of their initial comments and feedback, so that's in process. Gateway, I think we're still reviewing that internally before we release that to their team, and then Gary's working on the IRB applications and the steps necessary for all of that. So we've got a lot of wheels turning at this point, which will all start to come together at these meetings.
What other questions can I answer?
High level for a mixed-use project, I know it can vary, but do you have an estimate of what has been acceptable in some of the stuff you've seen for a percentage of cost covered by TIF? Or?
I really don't. I mean, this site has a lot of costs associated with it. It's about as far from a greenfield site as you can get. And even putting aside the past trials and tribulations and the costs that the developers incurred with that, you've got structured parking, you've got stormwater, you've got some really extraordinary infrastructure costs that you don't see a lot of projects, at least here in the Midwest, that have that level of infrastructure demand there. I will say that I think if they can keep working on their plan and really start showing us firm commitments with tenants and other components, they seem to be on the right track in terms of what they're putting forward. I like the fact that they've got a better blend of residential, retail, hotel, and potentially office now. And that's good not only for tax diversification, but also for economic resiliency, right? If something gets weak, you're not cratering the whole thing. And so I think just from a high-level perspective, Nick, I think that makes sense. But this is going to be an unusual deal. And again, I think my analysis, frankly, is going to say you probably could justify a higher level of, just objectively speaking, you could justify a higher level of incentive than I'm ultimately going to recommend to you, because the cost would be too high to the city. And so I think we have a lot more work to do on that, but I think both that and then the bonding question, and whether it's all going to be SO, or if it makes sense to do something on a geo basis, albeit with developer guarantees or other security provisions, will be something for further discussion. And ultimately, it's my job to give you the best options on whatever route you decide you want. So we might put together a package that we think makes sense, but if on a policy perspective you want to go in a different direction, then we'll bring you the very best option with that direction.
So, I've got a question for Laura. Does the planning commission, I mean, if they change the architectural structure of it, will they be able to delay us at all?
No, at this point, unless they come back with a significant change, because they showed, and Daniel will correct me if I'm wrong, but they showed the office building as a component of the project. So unless they start shifting major square footages or other components of the project, they have their preliminary plan approved. And actually, they have their final plan approved. So they're through that process. We expect the next thing to sort of walk through the door will be actual building plans that we'll start to review for issuance of building permits. They're that far along in the process. Now, if they make changes, it will, at a certain level, it could re-trigger a review of all of that, but we don't anticipate that at this point.
You know, could I just, I want to just revisit one point I made about what you could justify in terms of incentives versus what we might recommend. You might say, well, you know, how do we know they will actually go forward with a deal that's less than what could be recommended, right? Well, there are market standards on what kind of rate of return is reasonable, right? But this is not a typical project. And I think it's reasonable to expect that this development team might be willing to do this project at something less than a market rate of return. So it's going to be part of our job to really figure out what is that reasonable balance of getting to, you know, something that will get the deal done and be viable without necessarily expecting that you need to help them to get all the way to a market rate of return because of all of the trials and tribulations that they've had over the last 10 years. So I just wanted to, we'll talk more about that point, but I hope that makes sense that we know that they want to get this deal done, and I think, you know, most people in the city want to see something positive happen there as long as it's not at too great of a cost. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, next up on the agenda, we have an update on the 2018 through 2022 Parks Program Plan and review the miscellaneous funds. Laura and Brian.
Yes, thank you. So last week, I think it was, we talked about the streets and stormwater components of our capital improvement plan. Tonight, we're going to cover the Parks and Recreation Program Plan, which is the third major area that we have typically budgeted here. So this addresses capital infrastructure needs at the community center, at the outdoor pool, and throughout all of our outdoor park systems, including debt service associated with the Family Aquatic Center at this point. So we do have 8 outdoor parks included in your packet. Is kind of that list. Sometimes people forget about what parks we have and what amenities are in each of those parks, so I always like to include that refresher, and this has been updated to reflect the latest addition to our park system, which was Legacy Park at Martway and Broadmoor. As we're all familiar with, in 2013, or in November of 2012 actually, voters approved a 3/8 sales tax, which is dedicated for Parks and Recreation. When the sales tax language was crafted, it was done so in a way that allowed those revenues to be used for debt service, capital improvements, and operating costs. First couple of years of the sales tax, we actually transferred some of those revenues. The first year, $100,000, the second year, $25,000 into the general fund to offset operating costs associated with the community center. As we got further into that process and some of our conversations surrounding self-sufficiency and cost recovery at the community center, we had a conversation and made a policy decision as the council to really use those sales tax revenues for capital projects and to stop that transfer. So since 2014, we haven't seen a transfer into the general fund to offset any operations. In 2015 and 16, staff, citizens, council, and a consultant team worked on the development of our first comprehensive park master plan. The council approved that in June of last year, and we're now starting to see projects coming out of that process. So we'll see some come forward. we've kind of been sharing with you. John and his staff have taken on a number of maintenance activities, whether that's tree trimming or power washing, replacement of trash cans, some of those other kinds of just basic maintenance things. That was one of the items identified in the Parks Master Plan is implementing and memorializing and working from a set of maintenance standards for all of our outdoor parks. So we're starting in that process. We've had a dog park task force that was formed. You'll see a recommendation, I think, coming forward at your August committee meeting there. And some other things that are coming through both staff and the Parks and Recreation Commission. Because a lot of that is still in play, you'll see us in the 2018 through 2022 Parks Plan using a placeholder for outdoor parks improvements. So you'll see about $100,000 a year, increasing to $150,000 a year in 2021 and 22 to be spent on specific improvements in our outdoor parks. So as we get it down in finer level of detail on what those improvements are and those priorities, we do have funds set aside to accommodate that. So like we have in previous years, we categorize our expenses really in 3 areas: capital projects, and we break those out on this side to improvements in our park systems, improvements at the Outdoor Aquatic Center, and then improvements at the community center. Then we look at operations and maintenance, and primarily we've been using that category to build reserve funds over time. Our goal with the sales tax was really not just to take care of deferred equipment and capital needs, also to look to the future to help offset and balance out and level those costs for us. So the plan that we've presented does show a positive fund balance at the end of each program year, but there are a number of items which have not been included in this program, and I want to walk through that. And there's an Exhibit A to this. There's a replacement Exhibit A. Christy caught my mouth was bad in Exhibit A. So there's a replacement Exhibit A that should total $373,000 instead of the one that was included in your packet. So as we've talked about in the past, probably the 2 areas at the community center which cause us the greatest concern are the HVAC and other mechanical systems, things dealing with the pool filtration system and the mechanical systems that help support the indoor pool. I think effectively in all cases we are dealing with equipment that was original to the construction of the building, which means in the case of the south side of that building, that facility was opened in 1999 and then the expansion in 2004. I always get that wrong. I don't know. One of these days I'll remember that one. You may remember that back in January of last year we switched a long-standing HVAC maintenance agreement. We changed firms, and one of the things that was important to us when we made that change was working with the new firm to actually create an inventory of all of the systems and equipment that we have, and then to, on a quarterly basis, be documenting immediate needs and concerns, but also future needs and concerns. That inventory has been created. Those needs continue to grow, and probably more concerning, the person that has been working with us for the last 18 months left this company last week. And so we're going to hope we don't have to sort of reset that clock, but there will be some retraining involved with that. But we think it's really important. I think that in what we've identified between the HVAC systems and the pool mechanical systems, there's well over $1 million that needs to be invested in that facility over the next 5 years. You do not see that programmed in this 5-year plan for a couple of reasons. One, because I think we need to step back, and we're going to recommend taking about $20,000 out of the facility reserve funds in 2018 to really put together a study and look comprehensively at what is the best solution longer term as we replace all of these systems, and how do we do that most efficiently, both from a utility and resource utilization standpoint, but also a cost standpoint. The systems are very different in terms of what was installed originally on the north and south sides of the building. So I think, and technology has certainly changed over the years, so we'll be looking at that. and then coming back with what that replacement strategy needs to be. I think there's a potential to look at something similar to what we did with the streetlight debt issue, which is I think we may be able to identify enough offset in what we're paying in maintenance and repair costs annually now to cover all or a large portion of that if we were to do a small debt issue, to kind of get that facility where we need it to be. So those items are not included. We will start working on that and bring that information back to you, including some recommended financing or funding strategies. The other thing that we did, and I have to commend Christy for really taking a look at some of the things that were pulled off in Exhibit A are things that she has identified as certainly if the funds were available, she would like to program these things into the facility. Some of you may have heard recently that Matt Ross is the community center in Overland Park is going to be closing down for several weeks at the end of July through the first part of September to do a whole series of upgrades. They're adding all new play features in their indoor pools, a new indoor almost sort of playground structure. They're talking about a new pool filtration system and some new HVAC units. That facility is just 7 years old. But I think it helps to characterize the difference between the planning and some of the struggles that I think we've been up against over the life of our facility, because we're still catching up with things that need to be done, and it becomes difficult for us to add those things that are sort of attractive from a patron standpoint or attracting new members to the community center. So trying to balance that I think is important. We wanted to, even though they weren't programmed in the 2018 to 2022 plan, we wanted to make sure they were out there for your consideration. You know they exist, and that as funds allow or we see those opportunities, we may try to add those, certainly try to add those back in future years.
So Exhibit A are things we would like to do that are not in the 5-year plan.
Yes, because it kicked us into negative fund balance
in
positions.
19, on Exhibit A, we had a dance floor conference center for 12. And in 19, on the 5-year plan, we had a dance floor conference center for 12.
I need to fix Exhibit A again.
So you caught one in addition to us. Thank
Yes,
you, Ron.
sir.
What's that?
You caught
Yes,
one
so
in
I'll
addition
update
to us.
Exhibit A
Thank
again.
you.
So I think what this highlights for us, and we talked about it similarly on the street side last week, is that we do have a sales tax revenue stream that has been fantastic, and we've benefited from that tremendously. But I think it's really time. I think we've got to project out beyond. This sales tax will sunset in 2023, so just 1 year past this program that we're looking at as part of the 2018 budget, and thinking about how we plan and structure and prioritize our future improvements to line up with revenues. Because minus that sales tax stream, really the only dedicated Parks and Recreation sales tax revenue that we have is a third of the special alcohol funds that come into that purpose. I think the good news is, as Christy and I have looked at and talked about, particularly on outdoor park improvements and playground structures, there are a number of grant opportunities that are available. So that's certainly something that we will be pursuing. We don't show any grant dollars reflected, but that's something that as we identify those parks and those improvements, we will pursue those aggressively. It seems to be an area where there's still some money to go after, so we will certainly do that. Other questions, thoughts, comments?
Have we done any more analysis on just looking into possible alternative energy sources to put into the community center to help either offset some or all of the costs down the road?
I think we have not taken that step yet, but I think that's part of what this study would need to look at, is what options would make the most sense for us.
That's where you might get more grant opportunities too.
I know there's some good grant opportunities out there.
Alternative energy sources to offset what?
Well, looking to do
Just
solar or possibly wind power or some combination thereof to help offset some of the operating costs. A lot of that technology's got to the point where it pays itself off in a pretty relatively short time.
For the electric bill.
I mean,
Well, if you remember from our general fund budget, our electric bill runs in the neighborhood of about $200,000 a year for the community center. So savings that we can identify there could certainly benefit us in other areas. So then we just include just a quick look at some of the other miscellaneous funds that we are required to budget and maintain separately. The first being the special alcohol fund. That's 1/3 of the liquor by the drink tax that comes in to the city. 1/3 goes to the general fund, 1/3 to this fund, and 1/3 to special parks and recreation. We anticipate in 2018 those revenues will be about $65,000. Historically, we've taken the majority of those funds, and we are seeing an increase in those, to the Drug and Alcoholism Council, who has a grant program, and they administer that and make recommendations for funding to a variety of agencies. We are still recommending that we take about $30,000 of the revenues in 2018 and dedicate that to the Drug and Alcohol Council. For those purposes, the council will see those recommendations and ultimately have final approval on participating in that program or not. They ask us for sort of a general anticipated commitment in every budget year. We've then taken about $15,000 of that to offset expenses associated with our DARE program. And then in 2018, we're looking at taking about another $15,000 to help offset the cost of the mental health co-responder program, which we'll begin participating in, which we've talked about that on several occasions, where that will, Johnson County will be providing a mental health professional that responds on calls with our law enforcement department. It's been proven in other departments and agencies to reduce the number of transports to jail and or hospitals, and has seen some real success.
Is the contribution to the Drug and Alcoholism Council, is that kind of your plug figure? I mean, you've got these revenues coming in, you've got to allocate them in a certain way. We've added the mental health responder, and so the reporting is then what goes to the alcohol council. Okay.
Yes, we've tried to look at, and before, I think in terms of the activities that we were performing specifically that would qualify, DARE was about the only program. I think the mental health co-responder, as we've talked to many of the other communities, they're looking to this resource to fund that service. Obviously, many of those calls are, and those issues have ties.
For some reason, I thought some years ago, a certain percentage had to be devoted to parks and recreation activities.
There is, so 1/3 of the total funds, so $65,000 that you see in this parks plan is 1/3 of the special alcohol dollars. Matches up with, you'll see a revenue line item in the general fund and then here in the special alcohol fund. In the solid waste utility fund, that's where we keep track of utility fees that we collect primarily from single-family households to cover the cost of the trash, recycling, and yard waste contract with Waste Management. The 2018 contract, we have been notified, will be subject to a 3.85% rate increase. Built into our contract, it has to be over a 5% rate increase before we can trigger a renegotiation. So they're below that figure. I will tell you that as they went through the transition, they failed to notify us of rate increases the last 2 years, so we've benefited because of that sort of lack of organization, I would say, on their part. But we are expecting to see an increase. Our contract at this point is in place through the end of 2019. So as we move into next year's budget process, we'll be talking about options and alternatives for the delivery of trash service. So currently, we share the total cost of the trash service. 86% of that roughly is paid by the resident, 14% paid by the city. We just applied that same cost sharing percentage. I think we talked about this as we went through the general fund. And so you're looking at, on an annual basis, an increase of about $5.76 per single family household to accomplish that. Then we do fund the balance of that contract with a subsidy and transfer from the general fund. The actual subsidy is about $85,000. From an audit perspective, have seen for the last couple of years that we've shown a negative fund balance in that fund, which is actually a violation of our Kansas budget statutes. And so we're recommending that we pull an additional $25,000 this year to get that balanced. If we need to, I think that it can come from the general fund to get that fund balance back into a positive position. So we pay out of the solid waste utility fund, we pay the annual trash contract with Waste Management, and then we also rebate, that portion of our community rebate program, which is the solid waste utility fee, comes back out of this program as well, and that's about $5,000 annually. The annual contract with Waste Management is estimated at about $585,000. Then we have the MCBB fund, which replaced the MBDC fund. You may remember back earlier, or at the end of 2016, we disbanded the MCBB committee. But because we collect transient guest tax revenues, we're required legally to account for those revenues in a separate fund, which is our Convention and Visitors Bureau fund. So the fund stays in place. We also went through and presented you kind of an analysis of the remaining fund balance in that fund, and that's where we brought forward the recommendation for funding for the pole sign incentive program, and we're holding on to some additional funds to be used to support business activities. So essentially, the majority of the expenses in this fund are related to the Mission magazine, so we use and dedicate all of the transient guest tax revenue at this point to the production of 5 issues of the Mission magazine each year. We also use that fund to manage the revenues and expenses for the Mission Business Partnership Association and our annual holiday adoption program. So those are really just pass-through revenues and expenses in that fund.
And that, between 2016 and 17, that's why the MCBB magazine went up from 22,000 to 50,000?
So in some years, we have split the cost half between the general fund and what has been shown as the newsletter. So there was $20,000 there, and then we usually carried the balance of that in the MCBB fund. This year, we'll carry it all in the MCBB fund, and if the revenues don't keep up with, the transient guest tax revenues won't cover that, then we'll make a transfer. But we anticipate that the transient guest tax revenues have now reached a point where they will cover the full cost of the magazine. So we took the cost of the magazine and split it between in two different places before. The other 2 funds, Mission Crossing TIF CID and the Cornerstone Commons CID, these are set up, Bruce referenced in his presentation, sort of pay-as-you-go scenarios. So both of those development projects and their development agreements, they were pay-as-you-go situations. So we collect those revenues and those are distributed on a quarterly basis back to the developer in accordance with the development agreements. And Brian is much more familiar with those than I am if you have any questions about that process. So what we really have left to do in our annual budget process, the last kind of outstanding item is the results of the classification and compensation study, which we are scheduled to have a presentation from the consultant next Wednesday night. We are scheduled to begin that at 6, and then so we'll start with that, and then we'll kind of move into Bruce's conversation about the more general deal points related on the Gateway District. That will give us time to kind of work through those issues, build that into, we're scheduled to present kind of our final proposed budget in a community dialogue on July 26th, and then as we move into our August meetings, we will be kind of wrapping up. That gives us our schedule for our public hearing, which is the legally required public hearing on the budget at our August 2nd Finance and Administration Committee meeting. And then we are scheduled to adopt the budget on August 16th.
What is on the 26th of July?
It's the community dialogue
What time is it?
with 6 o'clock.
Here or at the community center?
I think we scheduled it here. We've got flipped back and forth, but I think this year we scheduled it here. That's all I have, unless anybody has any questions.
So when you were talking about the NCBD fund, you said that the transient guest tax revenues of 9%, these funds are used to support the magazine. So that, and this is a little off, but, and this might be a question for Bruce, but on the 2017 Gateway proposal, it says that the agreement is expected to include amended versions as well as utilization of the transient guest tax. Is that saying that that the developer wants that guest tax instead of giving it to the city?
Yes. So they're proposing. So right now, the transient guest tax comes off of what was Value Place, I think is now Wood Springs Suites or some, I think that's the name of the one there along I-35. So that's what's generating the transient guest tax. So yes, the Gateway developer has asked to have the transient guest tax generated from their project be considered as part of the incentive going back into the project.
They haven't asked for city council salaries.
Don't suggest it.
Maybe coming.
Just check.
That's all I have.
Everybody needs to go to picnic Saturday.
Oh, yeah, be there.
Fireworks have been purchased, they're in my garage, so if it gets hot in my house, it's his trouble.